Namaskar. Considering the events of the last few days, I decided to change the color of my shirt. I promise to keep it legal, cultural and historical, and I'll stick to that. Thanks to the Karnataka State Bar Council and every member on the stage and off the stage for standing their ground, for enabling free speech, for enabling a free discussion on an important topic. Rest assured, anyone with a position which is contrary to mine, assuming I have a position in the first place, will not be gagged, will not be stopped from asking any question which is relevant to the topic. That is the operative phrase. I am grateful to all those people who have showered this event with such fantastic attention. I think Times Now, News Laundry, The Hindu, they've covered today's event brilliantly. I don't know if anybody has been watching the developments throughout the day. Astounding coverage. I don't think you could have asked for better coverage, unpaid coverage. Anyway, so we'll come to the topic. Here's how I propose to go about the discussion today. We start at 5:40. I will speak for about 45 minutes to an hour, and close to an hour will be opened up for questions, or even more. Okay, at the very least, 50% of the allotted time. Now, I don't wish to overstay my welcome, but the idea is to close the event by 8 o'clock. And considering an Indian farewell usually lasts for 3 hours, people usually say bye for 3 hours after they get out of the door. So the outer limit, the hard stop, will be 8:30 in the interest of the organizers. Okay, so please bear that in mind. My position on the topic has fluctuated over the years, and I think most people are aware of this. But I have no interest in presenting my position today. I don't wish to do that because this is not a political platform. It's not a mass audience which has been purchased through packets of biryani and alcohol, right? And the assumption is that if I were to give you the relevant data, or at least data which I believe is relevant, it is for you to draw your own conclusions or ask the right questions. That is the limited endeavor that's going to be performed here today. So if anybody has come here hoping for firebrand YouTube shorts and reels, not happening. Not happening at all. We will stick to the topic as much as possible, and that is the expectation even from the audience. I will stick to the mandate that I have chosen for myself in terms of keeping the discussion as clear, as objective as possible. But similar to the 370 discussion that happened on 2nd of August 2019, if somebody were to raise a political question, then I will not take responsibility for the outcome. Period. I will specifically ensure that even when questions are put which are political in nature, unless and until I have the consent of the organizers and the audience that I should answer the question, I will not answer the question. And these are the ground rules of the engagement today. We are very clear, this is a recorded event. Okay? Now see, when we discuss the question of Uniform Civil Code, how many law students do we have here? Fantastic. Brilliant. Very good. Okay. In legal research, one of the things that is expected of you to understand and distill is not the question itself, but the question in its most fundamental form and various manifestations of that fundamental question. You have to unpack the layers and ask yourself, what are the different ramifications of a particular issue that is being framed? You try and answer the question from a panoramic perspective, from a 360-degree perspective. An issue such as the Uniform Civil Code, let me first talk about the issue before I get into the issue itself, is obviously extremely emotive, and it is not particular to any particular community. For the simple reason that one of my fundamental disagreements with everyone who has taken a position either pro or against UCC, or specifically those who have taken a position pro UCC, is that they start with an assumption that personal laws are man-made laws, whereas the belief of the believer is that personal laws are also, or they have flown or they've been established by the divine. That's the position. You can choose to reject that particular position from a position of rationality, but personal laws in every faith differ because the source is either a revelation or a scripture, whichever way you see it. Now, it's easy to say, so what? Well, because it relates to religion, and this is Bharat, this is not France of the 1780s, and this is certainly not France of the 2000s or the 2020s. We were and we will continue to be a deeply religious society, regardless of whichever religion you may subscribe to. That will not change. So I think it's extremely important to take this into account. Now, there are two ways of approaching this particular issue. One, bulldoze that sentiment and say it doesn't make a difference at all. Usually, particularly in Bharat, when a law does not meet popular acceptance, it will never find practical application on the ground. There will be silent resistance, and it will be extremely difficult for you to enforce it. Considering the nature of the subject, this is an issue that requires consultation. I am not saying consensus building, because it is not possible to build consensus on this subject, neither within one community nor among different communities. That's not going to be possible. But merely because it is difficult to build a consensus, or dare I say, or even impossible to build a consensus, that does not take away the duty of the state to consult, to seek, and to engage. That is the basic expectation. Now, to consult, to seek, and to engage, again, is not the same as pampering all rabid radical sentiments. That is where the red line has to be drawn. Now, therefore, it falls upon the state to ask itself the first few questions. Why UCC? What will it look like? How will it be implemented? What are the concessions that are going to be expected from various communities and various members of different sects? It's an extremely nuanced conversation. This is not like Article 370. This is not like CAA. This has a greater implication because these are positions that communities have held dear for millennia, or at the very least hundreds of years. Does this mean that the tone of my conversation is moving towards an anti-UCC position? No, it's not. Does it mean that I'm moving towards a pro-UCC position? I genuinely don't know, because I need certain answers. I need certain questions to be answered. So I'm hoping to present those questions. The answers to each of those questions will differ for members of different communities. It will not be the same. And if you choose to have a conversation on the Uniform Civil Code without actually having a conversation on the history of codification of personal laws in this country, it is a truncated, moth-eaten discussion which is absolutely ahistoric and which has no basis in facts or history. So it is extremely crucial for you to understand the history of codification of religious laws in this country. When you speak of a Shariat Act, or when you speak of, let's say, the Hindu Code, or the position prior to the Hindu Code, by way of codification of Hindu laws by the British establishment, how did it happen? These questions are extremely crucial. Unfortunately, public discourse does not have either the patience or the bandwidth for these kinds of nuanced conversations. Considering that we have a majority of law students here in the audience, the hope is that your patience levels are better, that your ability to ask sharper questions is better, and your ability to arrive at conclusions, even if they are at loggerheads with your preconceived notions, is better. So kindly keep an open mind in this conversation. For a moment, keep binary, let's say, a binary approach on the side, park it on the side, and just pay attention to some of these factoids that I'm going to present. I'm going to cover a lot of history in a short period of time, therefore, obviously, quite a few milestones will be missed. But the hope is that I'm going to cover as many factual data points as possible, which will give you a broad picture. And from there, you can take it forward if you're still interested in the topic. First, if the premise is that personal laws have a scriptural or a religious basis, from there you have to make a jump to a uniform civil code. Now the language that is used or that is proposed to be used is a uniform civil code. It doesn't say secular civil code. So what is the consequence then? If it moves from a religious position to a uniform position, the question that people are bound to ask is uniformity based on what? What will be the basic, let's say, substratum or datum on the basis of which you will determine or define uniformity, and how do you expect everybody else to follow suit? That is one level of the argument where uniform civil code can still be religious because the word that is being used is uniform and not secular. I will have to focus only on the language of the acronym because I don't have a document in front of me still. We don't have a draft. So I'm going to ask some of these fundamental questions even if they look stupid for a moment. Now, if you say if a uniform civil code actually translates to a secular civil code, you're asking people to make the jump from religious laws to directly secular laws. And that is a huge portion or huge aspect of their cultural worldview. That's a huge aspect of their outlook with respect to interpersonal relations, with respect to marriage, the notions of marriage, with respect to notions of succession, with respect to positions of a man and a woman in a family or in a setup. Each of these questions are deeply tied to the aspect of faith. It's impossible to actually sever it. We assume that this is only limited to two major religions in this country. But even within each of these major religions, there are multiple questions. Not all of them have uniform practices across the board. In order for you to get people on board for such a sensitive topic, unless and until you explain to them what is the tangible benefit that is going to be accrued from it, it's going to be extremely difficult to convince even 50% of the population. I am not convinced yet myself. So those who did not want me to speak today should ask themselves what kind of preconceived notions did they harbor in the first place. They have made up their minds about my position. My position itself has seen a drastic fluctuation. And dare I say it is still in a state of flux, which means I'm still forming an opinion. I'm still reading. What happens in the colonial period? Let me just take about 15 minutes each for each faith system, at least the two major religions, before I come to the question of what happened in the Constituent Assembly on the question of the Uniform Civil Code. See, when the British man set foot in this country, as I have said before and I've written before, he was carrying the baggage of the Protestant Reformation. Because the entire colonization experience is the product of, or at least a partial consequence of, the Protestant Reformation. I've established this to the best of my abilities in my first book, and I'm very clear about this conclusion. Now, what does this mean? It is Christian in his approach. He is Protestant Christian in his approach. The consequence is he needs a book to say that this is the source of somebody's faith, because he needs a book to source his faith. So he chooses to impose his own experience, his cultural religious experience, on the colonized societies, and he starts looking for, where is your book? I have a book, where is your book? So it takes two shapes. One, if you don't have a book, you may call it custom, but it is apocryphal. The written word has a huge consequence in Judeo-Abrahamic tradition. I'm making factual statements here. I'm not passing value judgments here. So be very careful in terms of drawing conclusions about the tone of what I'm saying. I'm just being factual. And the tone is extremely academic here. Judeo-Abrahamic tradition places a huge emphasis on the written word because the revelation has been reduced to writing. Now, therefore, his question is, what is not written is not based on evidence, is not supported by evidence. So which is why even today, because Indian courts have followed English traditions, we look for textual evidence even with respect to customs, without realizing that textual evidence would only be secondary codification of what existed orally. You go through the Latin American experience, you go through African experience, you go to Asian experience prior to colonization. The oral tradition was huge, which is why the focus is on Shruti. We follow Shruti. And that's no different from most of these jurisdictions because they have all been nature-based. And most nature-based communities have a huge belief system in two aspects. One, it needs to be oral. Second, the tradition will be hugely hereditary across the board. It's not just Bharat where systems are hereditary. Two, access to that knowledge will be restricted. And there will be an elite group in most of these societies which are seen as guardians of that elite oral knowledge. And they will pass on that information from generation to generation. So when the white Christian Protestant male walks into this country, the European walks into this country, he is asking, where is your book? Now Bharat, even today, presents a conundrum to most Westerners. They can't wrap their heads around this idea. They're like, what is this country? Chaos everywhere. Traffic jams say chaos, people are chaos, north and south have no connection, east and west have no connection, even within the south there is no connection. What is going on here? So when they come to this country, among the first things that you encounter from his perspective, which is clear from his documents, is absolute frustration at the amount of data points he has to deal with. He's like, this fellow is saying this is custom, that fellow is also saying this is custom. How do we codify all of this? So what do? They end up identifying who according to them are the repositories of Hindu tradition. So they summon the Pandits of Kashi and they say, Batao. Now you sit and tell. So he's like, white man is asking, what do I say? Okay, this is what our Shastra says. Shastra is not a scripture, it is a knowledge tradition. There is a difference between a scripture and a knowledge tradition, which means it's like trying to read a BHARAT without understanding the principles of interpretation. Law students will understand this. If a scripture is read without the context of how it is supposed to be read and what is the manner in which it is supposed to be read, what is the training you need before you start reading it, everything will look stupid to you, or you will simply go by the literal word. Isn't there a difference between the interpretation of a BHARAT by someone who is legally trained and someone who is not legally trained? Of course there is. Because he sees it as a document, you see this as a legislation, which means there are principles inbuilt, from punctuations to internal aids to external aids. So what these people do around 1770s is they undertake the codification of Hindu law, and it's called Ordinance of Pandits, Anglo-Hindu law. So what we know today as codification of Hindu law or Shastric principles is actually British codification through their understanding of our scripture. William Jones and Colebrook, they decide to put it all together. Now when they're doing so, the one thing that they don't understand is what is the relationship between Shastra and Achara, which is scripture and custom or tradition. That is something that the white Christian European cannot wrap his head around because he doesn't understand the fundamental metaphysics behind this. Because the metaphysics is very different. He doesn't understand the concept of karma. He doesn't understand the concept of prarabdha. He doesn't believe in reincarnation. He has no faith in any of these things. Because there is a specific Christian parliament, to the best of my limited knowledge of Christian history, in the Roman period, where they specifically removed the assent or the endorsement to the concept of reincarnation. Until then, reincarnation was recognized even by them because they were still partly pagan Christian, because they still hadn't given up their culture prior to the conversion. Lithuania converted barely 400, 500 years ago to Christianity, so that's how recent it is. So considering that, if he doesn't understand the concept of reincarnation, none of these concepts are understood. He doesn't understand the relationship between Shastra and Achara. What is the traditional Hindu position on Shastra and Achara? I will give my limited understanding as a work in progress student of it. If I'm wrong, ignore it and pardon me for it. Most people who have some kind of understanding of Hindu philosophy will tell you that according to our calendar, this is the age of, I'm going to use an extremely politically incorrect word, and please be careful, I'm just about to drop a bombshell, be careful. Huh? This is the age of 7th Manu, ayyo, sorry. This is the age of the 7th Manu, it's called, and the name of that Manu is Vaivasvata Manu. That's what you actually chant, it's Vaivasvata Manvantare is how you effectively start saying, because we believe that there are about 14 yugas, so to speak, and you'll have each Manu. So Manu is not a person, it's a position. Just as most people believe that Vyasa is not a person, Vyasa is a position of people who take over that scriptural tradition of putting a particular scripture together. So if this is the understanding, the law laid down for this particular yuga by Vaivasvata Manu is seen as the current Manu Shastra or Manusmriti for this particular era or this particular period. But the relationship is, so let's look at it this way. If the law is immutable, you don't need different Manus for different yugas. So what is the job of each Manu? Take it from me, it's going to be called a Manuvadi lecture tomorrow by people who are not even interested in understanding what I'm trying to say. The job of each Manu or a successive Manu is to identify what from the past is relevant and what is needed for the present and put it together in the form of a Shastra for that particular yuga. That's the job of every Manu. So what is the commentary that you're supposed to look at for this particular issue? A member of the Imperial Assembly, I think, or at least someone who was celebrated as a scholar of Hindu Shastra, Ganganath Jha or Ganganath Chattopadhyay, his commentary on Medhathiti's Manusmriti is the ruling book to understand Hindu philosophy or Manushastra or Manusmriti. Now, who is Medhatithi? Medhatithi is the son of Vaivasvata Manu. That is the understanding, because it used to be a hereditary tradition, as I said before. Now, our position is custom sometimes is capable of being at variance with Shastra. Because custom evolves, it's like this. Think of Shastra as a legislation. What moves faster, society or the law? Society. What moves faster, technology or the law? What does law do? Catch up. So it records. That is the relationship between custom and scripture. So what does scripture do? It records. But the society keeps evolving, it keeps running. So it doesn't mean that what is not directly found in the scripture or what is not directly endorsed by the scripture is unshastric. That is not the conclusion. So you will basically ask yourself, is this violative of the spirit of the Shastra? If not, even if it is not specifically endorsed by the Shastra, you will not interfere with it because it's working for the society. Don't interfere. That is the organic relationship between Shastra and Achara or custom. But this white Protestant Christian can't understand this. At least let's say European, I won't talk about anybody else. So he's like, okay, what do we do? These people are so dumb that they haven't even codified their own scripture. He needs our help. He needs to be reformed. So that reformists, I use the word nonsense very responsibly. The tendency to reform starts with that because the society would have reformed organically because custom is moving faster than Shastra. What did you do? You codified it and you treated this as the law. So what was meant to be left to the society through a decentralized organic evolution is then centralized through codification by the white man, and then he says, I will now judge you on the basis of this. Alright? We are moving faster than this. Why? For two reasons. One, even if the invasions hadn't happened, the society would have still evolved. But thanks to the invasions, there is a huge rupture in your own evolution which is uninterfered. And in any case, since the society never lives in isolationism, there is always bound to be some kind of interruption. Either the medieval invasions, or before that the Huns, or before that the Shakas, so on and so forth, they would come. So we found a way of keeping this Jivan Pranali going independent and regardless of these invasions through a syncretic relationship between Shastra and Achara. But this man comes and codifies, and with that two things happen: calcification and ossification of Shastric evolution. Now we are being judged on the basis of that scripture. I am not going to distance myself from the scripture. I am saying that scripture itself envisages forward organic movement, and you have not been able to wrap your heads around it. So that is the first set of principles. Now why is this relevant? Did this exercise of codification of Hindu law stop with the white Christian European? No. Our brown sahibs took it further. Because one of the things they came and said was, and this is the language used, I am not going to use any epithet or title for anyone who was involved in the constitution, because we are living in an age of re-inquiry. So, regardless of anybody's icon status, I will look at it dispassionately. What they said, they did. What they did, they did. It is for us to examine and ask ourselves whether it was right, wrong, good, bad. That's the right of every present and the God-given right of every future. So without using any epithets for anyone, without worshipping anyone, all I will say is, from 1940s, when they decided to look at Hindu law, why did this discussion start? Now I'll gradually move in the other direction. So, colonial period with respect to Hindu law, I've broadly given you a picture. I will refer to a few documents only in the interest of making sure that I don't misquote anything, but I'm going to try and engage you in a conversation as much as possible without looking at anything, just so that you understand the saransh of what I'm trying to say. So this is one track, called as the Hindu track. Then comes the Muslim track. Now why is this important? I have demonstrated through the second book the gradual Arabization in multiple waves of the Indian Muslim identity with time, including the Wahhabi movement, which I have specifically said had its origins in a Delhi seminary. Why is this important? Until the process of Arabization is complete, or it is still work in progress, Indian Muslims continue to follow what law? With respect to succession, marriage, so on and so forth. That is the so-called period when this mythical creature called Indian Islam existed, because Muslims who were new converts or neo-converts of barely 1 or 2 generations were still living in the cultural setup of their ancestors. And therefore, Dr. Ambedkar points out during the course of the discussion on the Shariat Act in the Constituent Assembly and other places, the Maplas of North Malabar were following Hindu law. Kohat and Northwestern Frontier Province, which was 97% or maybe 92% Muslim, was following Hindu law. There was no imposition. That's because that is the law they had inherited from their ancestors, period, nothing else. So that law continues. Now, the two-nation theory picks political traction post the Khilafat movement, and the seeds for it were, according to me, sown at least 100 years before that, even before Syed Ahmad Khan, who was a product of the very same Delhi seminary, where the two-nation theory actually had its origin. Now, what does this mean? If you need to unite people for the purposes of securing a separate state, you need to be able to give them a common basis. Now the problem is, religion alone was not common or was not sufficient as a common basis, because religion and culture were fighting with each other. The Hindu ancestry and the Hindu culture of the convert Muslim and his contemporary religion or his present religion were at loggerheads with each other. So therefore, what did they have to do? The only way to create a pan-Muslim identity across the country so that this two-nation theory and specifically the Muslim League gets greater traction is by severing the relationship between the cultural past and the religious present. And to do so, you have to Shariatize Indian cultural values. Now, the British man obviously did not have any incentive in fostering unity in this country. Why would he? He was doing what we would have done in his position. Period. Are you telling me the Chanakya Niti is any different when you're actually trying to rule an enemy or any other society? It's not. Of course it is. So I am not going to look at it from the perspective of, I am just being clinical about this. He did this because he had a specific objective. Now therefore there is a very clear, I don't think the AC is functioning well enough. I think the audience is perspiring. Or am I boring them to death? So the point is, he also furthers the gradual movement towards greater Arabization for multiple reasons, because there is also a strong pro-Khilafat sentiment starting from the 1990s. In fact, it's not 1919s. In the book, I established that at least from 1890s, there was active communication between the Turkish Sultan and Delhi seminaries, establishing kinship between the two. Now, therefore, here is a homegrown need to establish a separate Shariatized Muslim identity in the interest of giving Muslim League a political strength and create for it a pan-India base, a pan-India Muslim base. And you have had the Hindu movement separately. The British man then finally realizes, why don't I codify Muslim law? Until then, British Indian courts were applying Hindu customs and principles to resolve intra-Muslim disputes without any objection from members of the community. Without any objection from members of the community. Nobody revolted. Nobody took out any banners. No effigies were burnt. No stones were pelted. Okay? This is less than 100 years ago. Because the Shariat Act was passed only in 1937. Now, when that legislation is passed, British Indian courts, what would a court do when a new legislation is passed where it disavows custom and brings in a new codified law? Every custom which violates that law is out of the window. So, British Indian Muslim jurisprudence starts changing from then on, because British Indian courts are now applying principles of the Shariat as opposed to principles of Hindu law, which were previously applicable to even Muslims, without imposition. Now these are the two tracks. So until 1937 this has been established. Now what happens is, by the time you come to the 1940s, all our English trained, British trained Indian leaders who were trained in the same mold as the European master, as the colonizer, started approaching Hindu law from the very same lens as the master. And therefore, the zeal of reform. Reform. The word used was Hindu law or Hindu customs, and the Hindu society represented a slum which needed clearance. Language used by some framers of the constitution. Seeing this is that gutter that needs to be cleared. Look at this, it's so cluttered. It's like this fuzzy brain. So many wires are entangled. I need to unravel it. So the project of codification that was started by the British man in the name of Anglo-Shastric law is taken further by their Indian successors. Now whether you want to call them Indian freedom fighters or not, I leave the discussion to you entirely. Because these were the principles under which they operated. So when they take it forward, a specific committee is formulated called the Rao Committee. And what does it do? It goes across the country, seeking opinions from people. They come back saying, Arey Baba, we are actually meeting with a lot of resistance here. Because people are also saying, why do you want to codify something that is capable of running on its own? Why do you want to fixate something? Or rather, why do you want to fix something in time and cast it in stone? CAST, not CASTE. Okay? So how do we deal with the situation? So they realize that there is extensive resistance that's coming. Now the foremost person interested in reforming the Hindu society, particularly of all its evils, were Sri Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and his law minister, who resigned subsequently in 1955, or maybe 51. Correct, 51. Incidentally, both of them supported each other in imposing restrictions under 19.2 with respect to 19.1 on free speech. They supported each other on all these things. They were no different. Now, when Sri Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru is embarking on this exercise, members of the Constituent Assembly are saying, don't do this because this is an organic flow. You don't understand this. You are too English in your headspace for you to even wrap your heads around this. You don't relate to us in any way. So the entire Legislative Assembly, or the majority of them, and members of the cabinet under Nehru were opposing him tooth and nail on the subject. Saying, why are you doing this? Then they said, okay, you want to codify because you want a secular law. Fine. Then the Hindu Mahasabha said, why do you want to only codify and reform Hindus? Let's start a uniform civil code. Because they're saying, what is this passion and zeal for reforming Hindus alone? I am quoting from them, I'll read it out, so that I stick to my word that this won't be political. And they're saying, if you want to do this, you're saying all citizens are equal. Everybody is equally subject to Indian laws. Then let everybody be the subject of reform. Why just the Hindus? That was the question. Fortunately, for once, Sri Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's Law Minister Dr. Ambedkar agrees. And he says, yes, why should we not have a uniform civil code? Now here's where the discussion starts. I think around March 1947 the discussion starts, and then the change happens. So Article 44, as you know it, had two previous avatars. Hindu philosophy, so obviously it had a previous Janma also. So Article 35 and then Article 39. Now what was the fight about? Those members of the Indian Constituent Assembly who were also members of the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights basically said, and these were people who were considered members of the political left of that period. Now just pause here for a moment. Members of the political left of that period wanted a uniform civil code. Hansa Mehta, I'll give you the names. Masani, each of these names I'll mention. And they're specifically telling members of the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights, make uniform civil code a part of the chapter on fundamental rights so that it is justiciable. Law students know the meaning of justiciability, which means it must be enforceable through courts in a writ petition, either under 32 or 226. So they're asking for this. They're outflanked by the rest of the members of the subcommittee saying, no, don't do this. We are not ready for this. Sorry, they are not ready for this. Too early, too premature. So they said, nothing doing. From there, the discussion is, if it remains in the chapter that deals with fundamental rights, those protected, pampered rights cannot be protected. So what do? Push it to DPSC, Directive Principles of State Policy. This is how it gets pushed from the fundamental rights chapter to the DPSC chapter. Now when this discussion happens, so Uniform Civil Code has been pushed into DPSC. That means all non-Hindu cultural rights have been protected. But the ongoing reformist zeal with respect to Hindu law continues. And so, this entire huge massive report which was prepared into thousands of pages based on the Rao Committee's cogitations and deliberations across the country. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru realizes that he has massive opposition from the then President Rajendra Prasad, from Vallabhbhai Patel, everybody, the Ayers and Iyengars on the committee, Anantasayanam Iyengar, everybody saying, sorry, you can't do this, you don't understand this. Now they were not saying, remember this, they were not saying that no, Hindu widows don't have the right of free marriage. This was not their position. They were not saying that our son is more equal than the daughter. Just because somebody opposes legislative interference with the rights of one particular community doesn't mean that they are being regressive or patriarchal. That's not the conclusion that you arrive at. Because they made their positions clear. Because what are they saying? Society conditions were slightly different then. Traditional roles of man and woman continued. This is the very same assembly that subsequently keeps same-sex marriage outside the scope of the Special Marriage Act. Go ahead. Brand them homophobic. Go ahead, do it. Do that also. What are they trying to say? That for every step that the society has to take, you give it some time. So the argument that was being extended to beneficiaries of the DPSC arrangement was being extended to Hindus as well, that give us equally the time to move forward. Because unlike others, our Shastras are not immutable, plus our Shastras are not completely binding with respect to custom and achara and what happens on the ground. Because despite English education, they understood the Vikruti that they had developed, and they were trying to say, your entire position is based on the codification undertaken of Hindu law by this colonizer who doesn't understand us. We will tell you that this is not our position. And that's the discussion that happens. And routinely each time the discussion with respect to the Hindu code was being presented, Vallabhbhai Patel, who would manage the floor of the parliament, would find a way to not have time for the Hindu code. To say, we don't have time for the discussion. Go on, keep moving. It's like Tirupati Darshanam. Jargandi. Keep moving, we don't have time. There is too much to be done here. There is too much of legislative business that this body has to attend to that we don't have time for this. Plus, one question that they asked is, what is this urge to look for so many loopholes in the majority community? I'm not saying this. I'll show the language again. I'll prove everything that I've just said. That your entire approach to this community is only reform. So, according to you, there's nothing right with us. If the state chooses to make one particular community the perpetual object of its reformist zeal, what is the message that you are sending to that community? That you are this special child that constantly needs special treatment in a negative sense. That we are the ones who constantly need reform. That's what they said. I'm not saying it. So therefore, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru realizes, I can't push this whole thing lock, stock and barrel. I will have to give it in doses and I'll have to tone it down significantly. Because the committee's recommendations were not fully acceptable, so he breaks it down into 4 parts. That translates to the promulgation of the Hindu Code Bill in 4 different installments from 1955 to 61. Post the resignation of his erstwhile law minister. That's how this moves forward. By which time Article 44 has become sacrosanct. That here reform will continue, their uniform civil code will be parked on the table for eternity. At least Article 370 is a temporary status. Nothing is said about Article 44, therefore it is indefinitely temporary. Which makes it eternal. And therefore the argument is, since it is in the DPSC, and since the history of the parliament shows that it was moved from fundamental rights to DPSC, there is no urgency for it and there is no legislative mandate for it, or there is no constitutional mandate to undertake this particular activity. Now then what happens? Obviously the Supreme Court has interpreted Article 44 and the position with respect to DPSC in multiple judgments. So what are the judgments that you should be looking at? One line of judgments that deals with enforceability or justiciability or otherwise of directive principles of state policy and the comparison with fundamental rights. And the other is, when can a discussion on Article 44 actually start? Advice from the Supreme Court saying, let's start the ball rolling, let's get the ball rolling at least now. Subject to correction by the erudite members here and there, the broad position on DPSC today is, directive principles of state policy is a statement of vision towards which policy statement will be geared or policy formulation will be geared, which means even though it is not justiciable through a writ petition, each time you formulate a policy, you will try and at least inch incrementally closer to the goals set out in the directive principles of state policy. So in that sense, to put it crudely or in any other way, directive principles of state policy are perhaps the definition of a Ram Rajya, which is to say this is what we will move towards. Now, if that is the case, the question that you should ask is, in light of these positions taken by the Supreme Court, where it is saying that policy formulation should be in the direction of the implementation of the DPSC, when according to some people will that blessed time come when we can actually have a proper conversation on a uniform civil code? Forget all the political shenanigans surrounding this. Ask yourself this simple question: when does the buck stop, or rather start on this conversation? What is the time period when we can actually say, now the society is ready? When will it be ready? From here, let's go to the question of what is the state's power to interfere with personal laws? Well, the state's power to interfere with personal laws already stands established because they have interfered with Hindu personal law. So I'm sure there is no question about it anymore. You can't talk about the unconstitutionality of the exercise of state power with respect to personal law because that's already done and dusted. What applies to the goose applies to the gander. So the question is, what is the constitutional justification to exempt one particular group or certain groups from the application of the very same constitutionally bestowed power to interfere with personal laws? My humble submission is, there is no constitutional justification. There are all sorts of non-constitutional justifications. Now, whether it's non-constitutional justification or unconstitutional justification, I leave it for you to decide. But this is the position. Now, the then question would be, okay, you have said UCC. Now, what are the areas that the UCC will cover? If the interference of the Indian state with Hindu personal law is to be taken as the template or an example, what did it interfere with? Polygamy, succession. Broadly, these are the two areas. Adoption to some extent, these are the areas. Well, these will be the very same areas. Naturally, the corollary will be, if interference with personal laws in the context of the majority community has translated to interference with three specific identifiable areas, that would be the very same areas for others as well. So legislative competence is beyond question. There is some track record or example for the areas in which the state can interfere. Now, here comes the balancing test. It can interfere. There is a track record. What is the constitutional question then? To what extent can you invade and interfere? That question would necessarily mean there has to be a balance between the state's interest and power to interfere with personal laws and the community's interest and fundamental right to protect its personal laws under Articles 25, 26 and 29, broadly speaking. Because cultural rights of minorities are also, not just minorities, cultural rights of any section of the population is protected by Article 29. Personal laws are part of culture, I dare argue that. I am not going to deny that. Article 25 and 26. 25 speaks of individual rights and 26 will speak of denominational or institutional rights and 29 will speak of cultural rights of a community. If all three were to be combined, your best possible cases, all three rights are put together. None of these provisions envisage a bar on the legislature's power to interfere. None of these provisions say you cannot interfere merely because there's a right. Because there are any number of instances where Hindu practices have been interfered with independent of the Hindu Code Bill, citing the very same reformist provisions under 25(2)(b) and other provisions, which speaks of for reform, for entry of depressed classes, so on and so forth. Okay? This question of balancing, it is for the state to answer. Following are the questions which I think that the legislature must seriously consider. If the state has taken a position that bigamy or polygamy disrespects the individual right of a woman, of course now there is a question as to what is a woman. I don't know what to say now. So, we told, who is a woman? What do we know? What is the definition? So phobic, what phobic? Now we don't know, all plus phobic only. So they will say this. They, huh? Okay. So the point will be that if you have taken a position in principle, what is your justification for the application of the principle to 80% of the population and the non-application of the very same principle to others? When it matters and when it is convenient, everybody is an equal citizen. When it matters and when it's inconvenient, sorry, no, we are not equal, we are more equal. Khalistan bhariye. I didn't say Khalistan, I said Khalistan. Which means Riktastan, okay, Riktastan, okay? So you can do that. Now the question would be, we have been told repeatedly by the Supreme Court and Constitutional benches, including in the Sabarimala judgment, which I categorically disagree with, of 28th of September 2018, and rightly so it's been referred to a larger bench. They've said, the majority opinion has been, if I remember it right, this was the language used quoting planetary system. Individual rights are the star in the constellation of fundamental rights of this country under the Constitution. This is the language used because that is constitutional morality. Well, apply the very same constitutional morality with respect to the basic individual dignity of a person who is suffering the indignity of bigamy and polygamy. Do it. Difficult? Well, then constitutional morality seems to have a fluid definition. Then let's go to the next step. We have already taken the position with respect to matters of succession, equal. That is again impinging on equality and dignity. If anybody were to go through all the live hearings on the same-sex marriage, the number of lessons that we were given on individual dignity, equality, astounding. Ask them to apply the very same arguments in the context of this situation and you will see how the position changes within a matter of seconds. Within seconds. This is not a political argument, this is an argument on principle, on matters of convenient hypocrisy. Right? Then from there you go to the next step. Okay, succession, now adoption. Each of these questions. Now I have to ask myself this question. The only way that you get to be treated as an island from the application of constitutional principles to a group is if the group or a particular mindset believes there are exceptions to everything that the Constitution says. Now whoever says as much or believes as much, I leave it to them. This is the only way that this is possible, which means exclusive treatment, exceptional treatment seems to be the response to a pro-UCC argument. I have not made a pro-UCC argument yet. All I've said is the state has already established a precedent by undertaking a reform with respect to 80% of the population. It has only two options from here on. Roll it back. I'm not saying because I want 3 more wives. All I'm saying is you have only 2 options. Roll it back or move forward. Status quo or yathasthiti does not seem to be acceptable anymore. I am not again presenting a pro-UCC or an anti-UCC position. Now, between the two options, what do you think the government can do or will do because it's an Indian government? It will not roll back anything that was already done to Hindus because that is not there in the Indian DNA at all. So it has only one option. But the second option would mean it starts fighting with that all-encompassing catch-all value of the Indian constitution, secularism. So this is one of those instances where three different forms of rights will meet this Trivedi Sangam. I'll tell you what it is. Individual rights and dignity will stop here. No, you can't go here. Constitutional morality will come here and stop here. Then all rights of women, gender equality will come and stop here. Because this space is occupied by secularism. That's the void, that's the Bermuda Triangle, where everything vanishes. It is the black hole where everything goes down and nothing comes out. Now this is the broad position. I will take just 15 minutes to read out certain excerpts. I will give you the references along with the dates from the Constituent Assembly debates in the document. Go back, read. People can criticize me for the book, but so far nobody has been able to disprove the book factually. And the test is, facts come first. Opinions can take a backseat. Sentiments have no place whatsoever. Offended sentiments, bahar jao. So on the first track of the evolution of Hindu code bills, read this paper called Codified Hindu Law, Myth or Reality by Madhu Kishwar, 1994. Make a note of these documents. Then you go to this, and please note, I have referred even to those sources with whom I have an ideological difference of opinion, because if those sources have been good on facts, then I don't have a problem with it. I may disagree with the outcome or the position, but if factually it's decent, I will not disrespect that particular document. Rhetoric, Reason and Representation, 4 narratives in the Hindu Code Bill Discourse by Chitra Sinha. Then Hindu Law Committee, also known as the Rao Committee. And the discussion with respect to this happened extensively between 1948 to 1951. Read the opinion of Dwarkanath Mittar, otherwise it should have been Mitra, because Mitra was pronounced as Mittar, like Chattopadhyay became Chatterjee and Bandyopadhyay became Banerjee. So read that. His opinions with respect to how the public responded to the proposal to reform Hindu law. Then you look at the opposition, specifically positions from Vallabhbhai Patel, Rajendra Prasad, J.B. Kriplani, all these people who ranged themselves against Nehru's position with respect to Hindu Code Bill. Then you read positions of Sri Shama Prasad Mukherjee, N.C. Chatterjee, and how they suggested the Uniform Civil Code, if at all the state wanted to interfere with personal laws. And then you take a look at the positions from the Sikh community, represented by Sardar Man Singh and Sardar Hukum Singh, who basically said you can't combine. By that time, the positions had changed, mindset had changed. They said if you want to include Sikhs in the Hindu Code Bill, we will not accept it. Then you will see, and now you will be reminded of quite a few positions that are being aired now. We are being told now by a lot of people who want to protect the rights of a particular group, before our rights, your rights will be affected first, because you have more diversity. So a lot of people have suddenly grown a special interest in protecting Hindu rights and Hindu diversity now. Here is what happened at that point. Shri Nasiruddin Ahmad from Bengal, he specifically criticized the broad application of the Mitakshara system across the country to say, this will lead to breakdown of Hindu families. This will lead to breakdown of Hindu culture and Hindu diversity. This was the argument that he wanted to present, because this response came as a reaction to Shama Prasad Mukherjee's suggestion for a uniform civil code. Then The women parliamentarians, especially Sucheta Kriplani and others, basically said that even what Nehru was proposing was half measure. It was not enough. Hansa Mehta had the very same position. Uh, then N.C. Chatterjee said, why not frame, if you have got the courage and wisdom to do it, one uniform civil code? Why are you then proceeding with communal legislation? Now here's the fundamental question that you should ask yourself. If a uniform civil code is going to be brought about, what will it do to the existing Hindu codified legislations? That is a question even for the Hindu community to consider. Right now, at least, the Dayabhaga and the Mitakshara systems have been broadly clubbed together and they've been made applicable. If a uniform civil code comes about, the last remaining vestige with the Hindu law in the form of a cultural application, will that go as well? That's a question that Hindus are entitled to ask. I'm batting for both sides here, or I'm batting for neither. Then, of course, so Dr. Ambedkar's position on the Hindu Code Bill, again from the very same page, the very same document of Chitra Sinha, read that. And then there's a publication called Indians Impossible Civil Code by Cambridge University Press. Seems like a prophetic title, go through it. And then I will come to the history of the Uniform Civil Code, right from the beginning as to when it was proposed and what happened. I'll just take about 5 minutes, not more than that. So the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights was a 10-member body. It categorized all fundamental rights into justiciable rights and non-justiciable rights, which means those which are enforceable through a writ petition through constitutional courts and those which are non-enforceable. Members included B.N. Rao. Who is B.N. Rao? He was the advisor to the Constituent Assembly who prepared the first draft constitution. Effectively, I would say he's the father of the constitution, at least its original draft. K.T. Shah, Hansa Mehta, so on and so forth. And in the final report of 16th of April 1947 of the subcommittee, the UCC was placed under fundamental right, even as of 16th of April 1947 in the final report of the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights. The state shall endeavor to secure for citizens a uniform civil code. This was Article 39. Now then, pre-Constituent Assembly debates. Both K.M. Munshi, Kulapati Munshi, and the one unsung hero of contributions to the Constitution in the Constituent Assembly is K.M. Munshi, the founder of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. You should read more on him. Astounding contribution to Bharatiya culture and to Indian Constitution. In fact, his positions on sedition in the Constituent Assembly are worth reading because he was one of the foremost people to say we must have a provision which penalizes sedition because we are coming in the immediate backdrop of the partition. That was his position. Both Munshi's and Ambedkar's draft articles of March 1947. So both Dr. Ambedkar and Munshi wanted a uniform civil code to be contained in fundamental rights. Then, while discussing what from Mr. K. Munshi's proposed draft shall form part of the enforceable part of fundamental rights, Mr. M.R. Masani, one of the members of the subcommittee, proposed that a provision relating to the common civil code be made. It was decided, now please note, it was decided by a majority that this was outside the scope of fundamental rights. The minority, which means those who wanted to keep this as part of fundamental rights, consisted of Mr. Masani, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, Hansa Mehta, and Dr. Ambedkar. You can't cite Dr. Ambedkar on all sorts of issues and then not cite him when it comes to uniform civil code. No, that's mighty convenient. Then, by 30th of March, the subcommittee had decided to make the uniform civil code a part of the principles of directive principles of state policy. This is the position that goes on. What I will do is that I will share this broad table with the organizers because I don't see the point in hoarding this. I will give credit to my researchers who have worked with me on the subject, Ms. Shaktiki Sharma and Ms. Avni Mishra, both of whom are part of my core constitutional research team, and as well as Ms. Shaktiki Sharma has contributed extensively to the research on both the books. They've put this all together because we've been waiting to present this material for years now in preparation for what was supposed to be the one book, which has become a tetralogy right now. So here is the position of Naziruddin Ahmad. who again says that as far as we are concerned, the Shariat is immutable, it's not even man-made, it's God-made, you can't interfere. To which Dr. Ambedkar basically responds by saying, भाई साहब, ये तो 1937 में आया, ये कहाँ से immutable हो गया? थोड़ा अपनी chronology को तो ठीक कर लीजिए. To quote a popular meme. So Dr. Ambedkar says, coming to the amendments, so what is this amendment from fundamental rights to directive principles of state policy? Because those amendments were proposed by the Muslim members of the Constituent Assembly, saying no, it can't be part of fundamental rights. Coming to the amendments, there are only two observations which I would make. This is by Shri B.R. Ambedkar. My first observation would be to state that members who put forth these amendments say that Muslim personal law, so far as this country was concerned, was immutable and uniform throughout the whole of India. We're saying this is your argument. I think most of my friends who have spoken on this amendment have quite forgotten that up to 1935, the Northwest Frontier Province was not subject to Shariat law. Now, why is Dr. Ambedkar referring to Northwest Frontier Province as opposed to any other province? Because that was the Muslim majority province. Near majority, complete majority, and after the cohort exodus of Hindus and the riots there, it had become almost 97% Muslim, I'm so sorry. It followed, so here's what he continues, it followed the Hindu law in matters of succession and in other matters, so much so that it was in 1939 that the central legislature had to come into the field to abrogate the application of Hindu law to the Muslims of the Northwest Frontier Province and to apply the Shariat to them. He says that is not all. Here's the second observation. My second observation is to give them an assurance. I quite realize their feelings in the matter, but I think they have read too much into Article 35, which merely proposes that the state shall endeavor to secure a civil code for citizens of the country. For a moment, allow me to pause here. The language of the provision on uniform civil code, whether it is under DPSC or under fundamental rights, either as Article 44 or 39, was always saying the state shall endeavor. So it had a more participatory quality. It was not a mandate that you will do this. It shall endeavor to do this. Now, therefore, those people who are against the UCC saying, it does not say you shall promulgate a UCC. It says you shall endeavor to. Therefore, you don't even have the very same constitutional competence as you would have had it said shall promulgate a UCC. You see, this is the lawyer at play. Shall endeavor is different from shall promulgate. But for a moment, look at it slightly differently. Even when it was part of fundamental rights, understanding the sensitivity of the issue, the framers of the Constitution only used the word shall endeavor. Even for that language, they had a problem because they did not want the state to have any kind of power to step into the territory of Sharia. Which is to say, a state which is not Sharia compliant cannot interfere with the territory of Sharia in any manner. I have not said this is their statement. They have said this as much on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. I don't even need to paraphrase to say this. I don't need to invent or fabricate anything to say this. It does not say, so therefore Dr. Ambedkar is saying, I understand your feelings, but you're reading too much into Article 35 because the provision merely proposes that the state shall endeavor to secure a civil code for the citizens of the country. It does not say that after the code is framed, the state shall enforce it upon citizens merely because they are citizens. It is perfectly possible that the future parliament may make a provision by way of making a beginning that the code shall apply only to those who make a declaration that they are prepared to be bound by it. Now you see where this optional option comes from. Where even Dr. Ambedkar says, at least let's start in that direction. Those who wish to break from the fold and embrace the secular code of this country, let them have the power to do so. Now juxtapose this in a slightly different context. Those who don't want to be married under the Hindu Marriage Act or the Muslim Marriage Act can marry under what? So you have the option of doing that. Why shouldn't you have a similar option in the context of application of personal laws? Because that means those people who have been held tight should not be given even one option to break free because that would loosen the bonds. That is the fear here. So even an optional position where the UCC is made optional was not acceptable. So this is broadly the sum and substance of it. You can read this until the cow's home, pun intended. But these are the issues, and this is the broad history. Now, what you choose to make of the debate surrounding the UCC, independent of the political noise being made around it, is for you to decide as free, hopefully thinking citizens of Bharat. Thank you.
There will be a question and answer session. Okay, no problem. It will go for almost 1 hour. But let me tell you the trivia. Few years ago, a private trust organized a speech on Article 370 of the Constitution on a Friday. I think Anu was there. It was on a Friday. Yes. On Monday, the bill for the promulgation of Article 370 bill was presented in the Parliament on Monday. The, the organizers were blamed that they were privy to the entire issue, which was totally a top secret. So if something happens on Monday, don't blame on the Karnataka State Bar Council.
Good evening, sir. Thanks for vivid talk. I want to restrict my questions to the aspects of law of succession. Now, as we know, there are multiple aspects within Hindu law itself, which is ancestral property, self-acquired property, and if we stretch it outside personal laws, various communities such as Kurg or the tribes in Assam have their own methods of devolution.
Correct.
Now, suppose if we have a working model, the UCC, my assertion primarily would be that are we creating a straitjacket formula where we are saying that, okay, leave all your customs, all your diversity aside, we're going to subscribe to this. Two, if such a model is prescribed, will it violate my rights under Article 25 and 29?
Right.
This is very important because I'm a strong proponent that
Right.
our beauty lies in our diversity. Now, the second part is you may choose to answer this. What is the necessity for the present government to, like, say, enforce or promulgate a UCC because we've been sleeping for 70 years?
Right.
What is the current necessity?
See, if you go to some parts of the northeast or in tribal communities, or even for that matter in Kerala, they have the policy of Marmagatayam, which is matrilineal succession. Okay. Frankly speaking, I will not be in favor of straitjacketing any of this. I will not be in favor of that. Because I'm less interested in what it does to someone else, and I'm more interested in what it does to the diversity of the Dharmic system itself, or the Bharatiya system in that sense. Two, there are quite a few examples where some, and I will not use the word Adivasi, I'll use the word Janjati. So you're, in the name of uniformity, you're actually pulling down some people. The question is, how do you decide the bar? Okay, that's an important question to be answered. Now, therefore, what I would suggest is, if there are people who are truly interested in being governed by a uniform civil code, leave it to their best judgment for two reasons. You have anyway decided the age of maturity for the purposes of marriage. So the assumption is that they are of sound mind and they know what they're doing. They understand the implications of a particular decision. If that be the case, at least for the time being, give UCC an optional flavor and leave it for people to decide regardless of the community they are from. That way, the diversity argument is met. Your social justice argument, if at all that is what you're making, also has some basic audience. Why? People initially thought, who's going to subscribe to the Special Marriage Act? Aren't there people who are doing that? Of course there are, right? We, in Tamil Nadu, we even have the Dravidianist concept of self-respect marriage or whatever they call it, right? Even that exists, right? So, if you have chosen to treat an institution as fundamentally an institution meant for adults, then give the adults the option of opting out or opting in, as opposed to legislating out diversity, okay? This can happen in the context of succession. Perhaps the more sensitive issue is in the context of polygamy, bigamy, maintenance? These are the questions. Now, I don't know what is the timing of it. I don't know the logic of the timing of it. But the point is, in a political discussion, any time you take it up, your timing will be questioned. Correct, including the timing of the seminar, as he rightly points out. By the way, just to add to what Mr. Basavaraj pointed out, I'm not blowing my own or tooting my own horn here. Watch the discussion of 2nd of August 2019 on Article 370 and follow the arguments of the petitioners. Of the petitioners, not of the government. And you will realize that their entire point is, we have a problem with the procedure adopted, not the outcome. And the procedure I suggested there is the procedure that is being presented through arguments by the petitioners. They're saying, why did you use Article 371 or 370? You should have gone with 368. Well, go to the lecture, you'll see it. So those who said the government listened to me, no. Any case, I don't think timing as a question can ever be answered to everybody's satisfaction. Someone will always have a problem with it. The government's job or mandate is to explain the why and the what and the how. In such a politically polarized atmosphere, tell me if any answer that is given on the question of timing by any government, will it be satisfactory? Since you asked me a political question, allow me to give you a political response without dropping names. Today we are being told by comrades that Sri Vajpayee was the paragon of secularism. During his tenure, he wasn't seen as one. Right? They said, he waited, why can't you? Go back to his own debates. And he'll say, कब तक wait करेंगे? The man was frustrated. ये अभी तक तैयार नहीं है, फिर कब तैयार होंगे is what he's asking. So the paragon of secularism that they're currently celebrating said this then. So clearly, I have to ask myself this question, what is going on here? Will they never allow this conversation to even be kick-started? I'm not saying that the government's preparation on this is on the point. I'm just saying, when will this conversation be kosher or halal? Second, see, if you go through, there are two ways of looking at a legislation. The operational impact of a legislation and the long-term impact of a legislation. The long-term impact of the Shariatization of Indian Muslim cultural milieu through the Shariat Act of 1937 showed itself on the 16th of August 1946, which is what you should be looking at, not 14th of August 1947. Right? It was one of the contributory factors. It need not have been the sole factor, because no historical outcome is a single variable equal. It always is a khichdi, and not all of it works in a linear fashion. So I'm going to ask myself this simple question. If the government wants to make a civilizational argument within the four corners of the Constitution, it must have the courage of its conviction to do so bluntly, clearly, and confidently, without beating around the bush. It's 1 hour. Can we? I think I've given this. It's only in the interest of others. Yeah?
Yes, sure. Sir, as a layman, I am not a lawyer. I have not studied law.
Yes, sir.
I am a general public, just watching, listening to your these things, speeches. By what I mean is, this uniform civil code could be easily implemented if the preamble of the Constitution, when Dr. Ambedkar was written, the secularism word was not there. You see, then now what happens, after some years, it may be in 71 or 77, by amendment to the Constitution, secularism word is inserted in the preamble. First thing we have to do to implement this uniform civil code is we should have an amendment removing this secularism from the constitution. That's all, sir. That's all, sir. Yes, that's the question.
The wisdom of 70 years of Indian experience is speaking. That is truly the frustrated, exasperated Bharatiya finally voicing his opinion as to what is wrong here. Now let them write letters. Next.
Sir, what is the relationship between Dharma and UCC? And second, from CAA, UCC, everything has been opposing. Why it has been not tolerated by other religious sentiments?
I don't know how to answer the question. See, the problem is whether the Constitution of 1947 recognizes the concept of dharma is the first question. One, the word dharma is absent. There is no recognition for it. It only uses the word religion, doesn't understand the concept of dharma, or at least chooses to feign ignorance about it. In the backdrop of a constitution that shies away from using the word dharma, I don't know how to even look for dharmic compliance of UCC. The constitution itself may or may not be dharmically compliant. So I don't know how to respond to the question without actually completing my point. That we seriously need to hit a reset button, but that argument always takes us in a polarized conversation. There is no room for the same conversation as to what is the impact and what was the mindset which resulted in the constitution. If you're able to see the impact of 150 or 200 years of English education in the current generation, which has trouble sporting its own cultural symbols, are you telling me that it wouldn't have shown an impact in the 1940s to the 1930s? English education in this country was introduced by 1835. So at least a century of it we had already suffered by then. So the only meta answer to this is that will require a serious going back to the drawing boards on what is the definition of this republic, what is the identity of this republic, do we need a republic 2.0? Not the channel, please.
So, one of the arguments advanced against the UCC is that it will knock a death blow to the Hindu undivided family, which is a unique concept. So, this will also be financially disadvantageous to the Hindus, because if the HUF is removed, then the financial strength of the Hindu family and the cultural bonding will be seriously impacted. What's your reaction?
Am I audible? Yeah. I don't disagree and I agree. Because you see, quite a few of our mercantile communities, their strength is drawn from the HUF. Its cultural value is one thing, but it actually provides a fantastic network, a family guild of sorts. These are the questions that we have to ask. Allow me to say something slightly different here. India continues to look at it itself through the European prism of a nation state. As a consequence of which, the zeal to uniformalize, so to speak, is heavy. From issue to issue, it may be valid or it may not be valid at all. Which is why I come back to the serious question that whatever remains of the remnants of even Hindu cultural and familial life, despite the Hindu Code Bill, what will happen to it if a uniform civil code is implemented? That is why I asked that question. We are constantly looking at it from the perspective of, oh, he gets 4 wives, I get only 1 wife. No, that's not the way to look at it. Formulate the question even better. What have you lost? What will you lose? What do you have that is worth protecting? These are basic questions. And that is a fundamentally cultural and relevant question to ask. Next.
Hello, sir. Namaste. Sir, my question is, if I may submit, considering the current political scenario or the social scenario, with the way we are going forward, do you believe that uniform civil code will lead to integration as it is supposed to be or as it is envisioned to be, or will it lead to further disintegration of our society?
Is it your position that we are not otherwise integrated enough? We are integrated? So what you see is integration? I think you're applying a lot of band-aids and cosmetic solutions to a larger problem on the issue of integration. Neither is this the platform nor is this the issue. So I'll park this for a home territory question some other day.
We have a question outside the house here.
Oh, of course, yes.
Outstanding audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Firstly, Sai, good evening and welcome to Nambo
My
Uru.
apologies. I was constantly to the left.
That's-
To the right.
Thank you. One personal thing is you must come here more often and address us. Okay, now to the question.
Can I
Sai.
crack a joke?
Yes, please.
So the rumor is that if I were to roam around in Luru or Uru in a burqa, I'll still be recognized.
Brother, well, my question is this. We have some kind of UCC in Goa. This is my understanding. Right. If such a provision or such a law exists in Goa, why can't there be an UCC for Pan India?
Okay. It's Portuguese in post,
16.
right? In a state with a significant Christian convert population, right? Plus, is the diversity of Goa comparable to the diversity of even some larger states of this country or the country itself? A uniform civil code makes a lot more sense when there is some kind of cultural homogeneity. Even if there is no religious homogeneity, you had some degree of cultural homogeneity until the implementation of the Sharia Act. But even that was taken away. So when you have cultural heterogeneity and not cultural diversity but cultural divergence, diametrically opposite views, what is the hope here? So the only way in some, and I think no matter how much the state chooses to build some kind of consensus, it will need to say no to a few concerns. And the problem is when that kind of a brute majority force is employed, and I'm not saying that brute majority is mad merely because one particular government is in power. No, I'm not going to make that statement. I will come back to my question of what is it going to do to me and us. The people may say, well, as a practicing lawyer in the Supreme Court, who also practices constitutional law, how can you have these opinions? Is that going to take away my identity as a practicing Hindu? I hope not. I hope it does not. I'm not going to separate it at all. Had I been of a different faith or community, would I be asked to give up my faith at the altar of constitutional morality? No. So why should I? I will not. I am usually interested in long-term impacts, higher order studies of what is it going to do 1 or 2 generations down the line, not the immediate impact. The immediate impact for the purposes of an election manifesto can be integration, unity and all that. It's not a checklist that you just say, temple done, 370 done, this is also done. You have to go beyond that. And unfortunately, allow me to say this, in the larger chaotic conversation which is heavily polarized that's going on, legitimate concerns of even the majority itself is not asking. Here I won't blame anybody else. Sane voices, even from the Hindu community, which want to ask a few questions out of curiosity, out of genuine concern, are completely drowned. For instance, the HUF question, such a valid question, or the existence of matrilineal systems of succession in the Northeast and other places. What do you do with that? This is not going to be an easy conversation at all. But the conversation is important because it is forcing all of us to revisit extremely problematic and uncomfortable parts of Bharatiya history. including constitutional history. So the significance of the conversation is less about the outcome at this point, but more about the learning of the people during the conversation itself. Otherwise, people wouldn't have even discussed any of these issues. How many people were aware of the circumstances in which the Sharia Act was actually implemented? How many people were aware of the fact that the bulk of the Muslim Indian population or Indian Muslim population was governed by Hindu law? Most people didn't know this until this conversation started. That's according to me the cost-benefit analysis of this conversation. Next. Thank you to everyone standing. Fantastic audience. So grateful. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. This side. This side. On your left. Hi. Good evening, all. So my question is based on the recent situations, like we see CAA and farm bills are heavily protested. So I see the both cases, the state failed to put their agenda before society. They didn't educate the layman's what the state intention. So it is a very simple when compared to UCC. So what do state doing to like educate this society, and how can they implement without society support?
I completely appreciate the sensitivity of this question, and thankfully you've asked it, because the one thing that I've said in quite a few places is the discussion on the UCC will be a test of at least two things of the current dispensation. Its ability to understand the consequences for all communities concerned and involved, its ability to prepare constitutionally for it, and its ability to articulate its position to two different kinds of audience, the home audience and the audience outside. Because no protest or no legislation which is passed by this government today is free from external scrutiny, especially open platforms, okay, open organizations. And I'm not going to say anything negative, because I think when you say something negative, you're closing the conversation. I'd say I hope they prepare better, which means it is my belief that they are capable of preparing better. 370 degree of preparation is not going to be enough for UCC at all. And this is not one of those instances where you can hope to pass something overnight also. Lot of people will be affected. And even what the government thinks of its as its own home constituency or home following may not fully agree with it. Everybody will have legitimate questions to ask. And how it's going to message it. Perhaps I think the government will also focus on shoring up its own abilities in terms of public presentation when it comes to this subject. I'm not saying they've done a bad job of it. I'm just saying that this is such a sensitive topic that any conversation is capable of turning communal within a matter of 15 seconds. You'll need someone with balance, with restraint, with preparation, and the ability to know how to navigate some of the landmines in this entire debate. I hope the government is looking at it. They have the talent for it. 100% they have the talent for it. There are quite a few people who are on the sidelines who I think should be coming to the fore when it comes to public speaking abilities. I hope I'm allowed to say this. No, it's not a political platform. I don't wish to embarrass the organizers. I'll leave it at this. Yeah. Next question, outside the house. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Am I audible? Yep. Though I'm on the left side of the dais, but I'm not from the left. Okay. The question I want to ask is, how will the minority clause be used in the constitution? Because there is no definition for minority. As you see that we Hindus are reduced to minority in 11 states already. So how is the minority clause used in the constitution to enforce uniform civil code, though it has not been enforceable by the court of law, but how will the state use it? That's my question. And the second thing is that in the case of Shah Banu in 1985, did the court use the principle of uniform civil code by bringing in the section 125 of CRPC for the maintenance? Did they use that principle? These are two questions from my end.
They
Thank you.
didn't need to do that because, first of all, it was not a civil question, that was a criminal issue. So that's one. But see, you have to look at it this way. Other than the name dropping of minority in this entire debate, what aspect of a crystallized right of a minority under the Constitution is relevant to the UCC is a question that people have to answer. See, if somebody says, as a group, I have this right, that argument still makes sense. As a minority group, I have a right. You will have to make a better case. You can't make that argument here. Okay? So, which is why I said that first of all, the definition of minority is typically it's only state-based, it's not national. It has become national thanks to a political conversation. It's always been state-based. Whether it comes to reservations or whatnot, everybody will tell you that it's always a state-based calculation. Whether somebody is an SC or an OBC or an MBC, all these are state-based questions. It's for the state to primarily look at. The first time that this became primarily national was when the National Commission for Minorities was set up in 2006. And the Minority Welfare Ministry was set up along with it. Until then, it was not. I could be wrong, subject to correction. I will tell you the extent of minoritization of Indian legal framework. The National Commission for Minority Educational Institutions, or perhaps the National Commission for Minorities, has more teeth and more powers than the National Commission for Scheduled Castes. So, a commission that is expressly set up to implement the vision of Sri Ambedkar has lesser teeth in terms of even contempt powers than national or let's say organizations for minorities. That is the extent to which we have hurtled towards extensive minoritization of Indian legal and political discourse. Next.
So, Jai Shri Ram.
Yes,
So, hello sir, I would like to start by saying that I'm a huge fan of yours, as I believe almost everyone present over here is. Yes. So, my question may sound a little wrong since I'm not a law student, I'm an engineer. So, the question is, like after...
Mechanical engineering.
Yes sir, absolutely sir, I am a mechanical engineer.
Good.
So, my question is, sir, like will the implementation of the UCC like, act as a weapon against acts such as the Waqf Board Act, which is currently in play?
No connection. So, one, there's no connection. Two, that issue needs to be tackled perhaps even more head-on than the UCC is my opinion. Next. I'm a last bencher, so let's go to the last bench.
Hello, my name is Shashank. My fundamental question is, we breached this topic in your presentation as well. The term constitutional morality, by fortune or misfortune, has gained a lot of prominence. Are we reaching a day where this term is at a loggerhead with the will of the Republic? To use Dr. Anand Ranganathan's phrase, are Hindus being 8th-class citizens in their own country? And the second question is more academic in nature. What quantum of uniformity will whittle down a state from a concept of state, and I don't mean this from a Eurocentric one, I just mean it as a territorial, a landlocked or a peninsular country with defined territory. What quantum of uniformity will whittle down this form of state into a mere association of persons?
Okay. Can I answer? Okay. See, I don't think you're looking at a hypothetical eventuality. Constitutional morality, in quite a few instances, the way it has been postulated, has already pit itself against the Republic or against the will of the people in quite a few instances. And I don't wish to get into the specifics of it, I've been writing about it. Two, what this will do is it will emasculate democratic elected legislative bodies and concentrate power in the hands of the unelected few who are accountable to themselves and to no one else. Three, the problem with the concept of a territorial state. So Dr. Shashi Tharoor has often propounded the concept of civic nationalism or constitutional nationalism as opposed to civilizational nationalism. What it does, and it is so unnatural and it is so ahistoric and it goes against the grain of human evolution and psychology, is that it is asking you to choose your allegiance on the basis of a synthetic document as opposed to something more organic by way of culture. That's perhaps the most anti-psychological proposition that I've ever heard, which goes against every grain of how people bond. When someone makes that proposition, I must ask, have you even understood the basics of human psychology as to what brings people together? We can all say that we are bound by the Constitution, but we are not bound as a people because of the Constitution. There is a difference between the two. One is a legal proposition, the other is a cultural, psychological, societal proposition. The assumption is that somehow a legal fiction will prevail over human mentality. No matter what you do, tribalism will present itself in different forms. It will only expand the scope of people who are within the tribe. But tribalism will nevertheless continue. There's a fantastic paper which was written by an Indian author recently, and I'll share the paper, on how the creation of EU did not create a universal EU, it created a more Eurocentric EU because it wanted to protect Europeanism more than protecting or furthering universalism, which was one of its stated goals. I'll share that article with you, it's a fantastic article. So each time you say that I am for universalism or whatnot, you end up creating a definition which again has the definition of an in-group and an out-group. Whenever there is such a definition, it's tribalism in some other form. You may look down upon it, but you cannot evade it or escape it because that is the nature of how the human mind works and evolution works. That's it. Next. So when you do that, it effectively creates a set of people who will be interested in using Bharat as a resource and who will have no natural bonds or affinity left to this country. So you will look at people who will have their plan B kit and bags ready to leave the country at the shortest possible notice, at the sign of trouble. If this is how you wish to build a country, I don't know how you hope to defend this country against all its challenges. Civic nationalism or constitutional nationalism is a farce. It's an absolute farce.
Namaskara, Dr. Shamprasad here. Sir, we have 5 crore cases pending. So the influence of UCC on alterations or modifications in the morphological structure or whatsoever on the number of cases. To quote what is my uru, my Namma Bengaluru, 50 family cases per week, 20,000 around family cases still running in the family court. So pillar to pillar couple are finding it very difficult. So in this context, how do you feel the UCC will have a socio-economical changes or ratifications on that? Thank you.
A hope that the state will promote a legislation that will reduce the work of lawyers is a mirage. That has never happened. And I'll tell you why. There have been instances, or in fact there have been institutions, not just in this land and other societies, where to precisely ensure that you're not creating a body that has an incentive to litigate all the time, you created societal dispute resolution mechanisms in the form of panchayats or whatnot, so that you have a first tier of resolution before you can go to a court of law. What we have done over a point of time is that we have destroyed these institutions in the name of them being patriarchal and regressive. The Kham Panchayat and the discussion surrounding the Kham Panchayat when it was actually being pilloried in Haryana, read through it. I will never ever disagree that there were instances of rank casteism or rank, let's say, misogyny that have happened in those institutions. Are you telling me that a formal institution which dispenses justice has never been guilty of any of these things? What are we talking about? Now you go to what the EU is doing. We'll all learn from the EU because they were learning from our past. Now I'll tell you what they're doing. There are institutions and policy think tanks which are dedicated to asking themselves, how do we outsource the process of, let's say, dispute resolution back to the society so that courts are not clogged with it, because somehow we have realized that courts are not in a position to do the job. You're actually reinventing the wheel. And now this is being called societal dispute resolution, not ADR, SDR. These were the mechanisms. Think about it practically. No matter which period of history you're looking at, even during the worst of invasions, the Yellow River Basin and the Indo-Gangetic Plain and, let's say, Bharat for the most part, has always been among the most densely populated parts of the world. what, let's say, institutional mechanism can you create which keeps the society completely out of it? In order for you to dispense justice quickly, you will not be able to. At some stage, the society will need to be involved. So from a formal mechanism of resolution by courts, you moved towards arbitration. When you realized that this is not going to work fully in all circumstances, you came out with mediation. Then you're looking at conciliation. Admit that everything that you think you have learned from the West is not right. At least admit it now. That there are quite a few things that we cracked which were good for our circumstances, which you decided to completely pillory and badmouth all the time, using patriarchy, misogyny, caste as your constant beating sticks or whipping sticks. I don't think that the UCC is going to reduce litigation in any way. I'm not sure of it, because as long as there are two people, they'll always litigate, there'll always be some kind of a difference of opinion. The question is how much of it needs to be centralized and state governed. How much do you want to relegate to the apparatus of the state, and how much should the society participate? That is the question that we have all been avoiding for a very long time. Next. Yes.
Jai Sri Ram Anna. I am from Bihar.
Yes, sir.
My question to you, Anna, is like in other religion, children, kids are taught their religious faith at a very early age.
One request, just one request. If the question has got nothing to do with the topic of uniform civil code, kindly don't. Rephrase the question, ask a different question, I don't have a problem. Just make sure that this doesn't become a different kind of an upanyasam altogether. Okay? Make sure that we stick to the topic. Yeah.
Okay. Rephrasing my question, Anna.
Yes, please.
My question is like in uniform civil code, that in northern part there are certain relationships which are prohibited.
Right.
But in southern part of India, we can marry to our daughter of maternal uncle.
Right.
So how we are going to accommodate that challenge? No one talk about this. Everyone is busy in talking about Muslim minorities.
Correct.
So this is my question to you, Anna.
See, the Sapinda relationships, the definition of degrees of consanguinity, so on and so forth, I'm with you. Particularly in the South, there are different definitions for it. Okay, there are different degrees of prohibition and lack of prohibition. I'm happy that you're asking this question, because it clearly shows that there is a lot within that could be affected. Hence the question of what will be the norm or the barometer on the basis of which you decide what is uniform and what is not uniform. I don't have an answer to the question, because I haven't seen a suggestion come forward on how they are going to accommodate or abolish all of this. See, I can understand if someone says that there is some kind of a scientific study which shows that each of this has actually translated to creating people with a particular problem, either there's a mental issue or there's genetic deformity, so on and so forth. Give some basis for it. An amorphous argument of national integration which does not explain how does the presence of something translate to lack of integration is not the way to proceed with it. It's like giving national security as an argument to every invasion of privacy by the state. Equally, that's a problem. Going by that logic, I should sit and support section 66A, which was promulgated by the previous dispensation, with a legal luminary who was helming the Ministry of Information Technology. Right? How do we then sit and defend all of this? Because what you think is justifiable for one dispensation surely becomes justifiable for another dispensation. Then your argument cannot be an argument of convenience because you have a political allegiance. The principle will remain the same. If section 66A was bad for one government, it should equally be bad when another government takes over. It suddenly cannot be washed in Ganga and all its sins have been purified, no? Next.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Oh, okay. It's coming. So, sir has a question in Kannada. Somebody will have to translate it for me.
ಪ್ಲೀಸ್ ಸುಬ್ರಹ್ಮಣ್ಯ ಸ್ವಾಮಿಯವರು ಆರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ 370 ವಿತ್ ರೆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಟು ಕಾಶ್ಮೀರ ಅವರು ಏರ್ ಔಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದರು ಏನೇನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೆಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಶಾ ಮತ್ತು ಮೋದಿಯವರು ಅಂದರೆ ಈ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟವರು ನಮ್ಗೆ ಇಮ್ಯಾಜಿನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗದೇ ಇದ್ದಂಥ ಒಂದು ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ನ ತಂದು ಒಂದು ನಿಮಿಷದಲ್ಲಿ ಅದನ್ನು ಇಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಅಂದರೆ ಬ್ಯಾಕ್ಗ್ರೌಂಡಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ನಿಜ. ಇವತ್ತು ತುಂಬ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಅದೇ ಥರ ಏನಾದರೂ ಈ ಲಾಯರ್ಗಳು ಈ ಲಾ ಆರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ಲು ಆ ಸೆಕ್ಷನ್ನು ಈ ಸೆಕ್ಷನ್ನು ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಬೇಡ. ಇದಿರಲಿ, ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ಸಲ್ಲಿರಲಿ. ಕಾಮನ್ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ಗೆ ಸೊಪ್ಪು ಮಾರೋನಿಗೆ, ತೆಂಗಿನಕಾಯಿ ಮಾರುವವನಿಗೆ, ಅಕ್ಕಿ ಬೇಳೆ ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ಸೋಪು ಊಟದ ಏನು ನೋಡೋಂಥವನಿಗೆ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ ಅವನು. ಆ ಥರ ಇರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಏನಾದರೂ ಬೇರೆ ಮೆಥಡಲ್ಲಿ ಓವರ್ ನೈಟು ಏನು ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗದೆ ಇದ್ದಂಗೆ, is it possible to do stealthily? Is it possible to do stealthily?
His question is, Dr. Subramani Swami spoke about Article 370 and he advised what method the government has to do. Anta. But in an unimaginable, beyond one's comprehension, Shah and the entire government overnight, they imposed Article 3, they removed Article 370 and brought about the uniformity and brought the Jammu and Kashmir within the fold of the Indian territory, that is Bharat. So what my learned friend is asking, why can't that be done in a magical way and bring about the changes? 2nd of August 2019, my friend spoke about Article 370. On Monday, that was on Friday, on Monday the bill was introduced and Article 370 was abolished. So let us hope so.
I think the negative consequences, can I speak in English, is that okay, please? Okay. The negative consequence of Article 370 was staring in our face. The creation of vested interest lobbies, the pampering of let's say, separatist interests, all of that was very clear. If someone wants to take a position on bigamy, polygamy, so on and so forth, I am then saying, have the courage of your conviction to take a direct position on it instead of putting it under this mischievous basket of Uniform Civil Code. Because as long as you put it in the basket of Uniform Civil Code, I will have my concerns. Okay, let's look at it this way. I'll give the question slightly, the answer slightly differently. When the Constitution wanted to take a position on abolition of untouchability and entry of depressed classes within temples, it took a Hindu-specific approach because it believed at that point that caste was limited to only Hindus, whereas the fact is it is a subcontinent phenomenon. Now, therefore, your position has been, wherever there is a problem, I will address that problem. Similarly now, where there is a problem, you address that problem. Why is everybody being involved in this conversation? That is where we have a problem. Even after 75 years or 76 years, after Sri Vajpayee and everybody else has come, we still don't have the guts to say, here is the problem, I will address the problem because I am a sovereign state, you're an equal citizen, therefore you're equally bound by the laws of this country. Why can't you say that? So what does it tell you? That fair enough. So the point is, when you don't pack a bite with the bark, people will constantly underestimate you, and in that sense, we remain a soft state. We may not be a soft state with respect to Pakistan, but we are a soft state with respect to mentalities here. Next. Last
Sir,
bit,
I'm
sir.
outside,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. From there, let the mic travel to the last row.
Sure.
Yes.
So, first of all, I'm very happy to finally see you live after 6 years of following you.
Very kind of you.
And
Thank you.
a very happy Raksha Bandhan to you, and thank you for coming here on this.
Thank you. Very
So my question is not pertaining to the nitty-gritties of UCC, but where it should be on the priority list of the agenda of the government pertaining to the Hindu community. So we see that a lot of people online today are saying that UCC does not affect the Hindu community as such a lot, but more like higher on the priority would be getting, say, the Waqf Act out of the picture, or say, the Temple Act out of the picture. So how much do you agree with it, and what's your opinion on it? Thank you so much.
Can I respond? I agree with that opinion. I agree with that opinion. Okay. Okay. Done. No, in CPC order 8, there is a specific thing, no? Unless there is a specific denial, blanket denial is not enough. So I have to take specific permission here. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We'll come back to you first. Let's go to the last one. We'll come back.
Good evening, sir. My name is Kanika. Hi.
Who's that? Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
sir. Sir, my question is, if given a chance under your supervision, would you like to see India as a democratic country, which it is? Is it really justifying the statement being as a democratic, or do you want to see it under a monarchy? So monarchy as in not as the UAE or UK or like that, the Indian monarchy. So what is your opinion?
I will look at a slightly more enlightened democracy where there has to be some kind of a combination between popular will and enlightened will. That was the original design between the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. When the British man introduced it, he wanted to use the lower house as a pushback mechanism against the opinion of Indian leaders who had been elected. And therefore, the lower house was constantly populated with bureaucrats and former appointees of the British state. When we started looking at this architecture, we decided that we will have subject matter experts who will populate the upper house, and that will be the upper house, which will curb the noise of popular will. Because let's be honest, popular will not always throws up the most enlightened of options. We have seen that for 70 years. And we have seen how popular will is subject to all sorts of other considerations other than societal consideration. That is, so I'm certainly not looking at the continuation of the current model. As someone who has some amount of interest in the evolution of democratic model itself, in our lifetime, several countries will go through a serious introspection of the validity and efficacy of the model as it stands. It may not jump to absolutism, it may not jump to monarchy, but it will certainly say, where are the experts? When will we have a conversation by people who understand the subject? That call, I think, is gradually coming, and I think that's also a function of greater awareness, greater political awareness, and greater education. With time, that may happen. I certainly see that happening because sometimes even geopolitical interests may force us to ask this question. Look at China, it can take a quick decision. Look at India, it's not able to take a quick decision. So there's an external pressure where you're competing with someone who can take a faster decision. And there's an internal pressure where you're realizing that this is not exactly throwing the best of options. This is not a reflection on any dispensation in particular. Let's be very clear. I'm just saying, in general, the quality of democracy goes up with the quality of the people itself. That is the first line of defense. And right now, think of a generation. I think between the 60s and the 70s, there was a fantastic thinking generation. And that idealism was also being exploited by comrades. People who wanted to do something right were pulled to the left, right? From the 80s and 90s, you have seen a stage of apathy, which explains the massive brain drain of the thinking elites, saying, I can't sit and fight with the system, I'm leaving this country. Post-liberalization, you see that there is a shot of economic independence, and so with that, people are saying, oh, I can create wealth in this country. With that, you're seeing more wealth generation. With economic confidence comes civilizational confidence, and so people are saying, why don't we stay here and do something better? So I think that circle is going on, that cycle is going on. Another 25 years, let's see what happens. That's my window that I'm interested in. Yes. So, Arvindji, ma'am there, and then we'll go to the boys on the right. I can call you boys, right? Okay.
Thank you. Mine
ma'am.
is rather a long question, so please bear with me. As a woman, the UCC is often, to the best of my memory, the UCC has been presented as a panacea for all the problems that we face and all of that. Clearly, the challenges are many. My question comes from that context. The personal laws have lent themselves very well in terms of, presenting ourselves as a secular country. to the normative powers that are, to further our global ambitions. Yeah, the irony that we don't follow a Western concept of secularism is something that I don't, it doesn't escape me. But the fact is, it has helped our case. So, does it make more sense to pull out individual aspects as identified by you, whether it's polygamy, succession, all of that, under what I believe is called the doctrine of essentials, to ensure that women are protected? And the UCC is not exactly, the byword for everything that we need today.
Fair enough. I think one of the things that the government may want to consider seriously, I hope your leg is better now. So the point is, the government could perhaps take a leaf out of the Nehru playbook and look at incremental movement in this direction and have an issue by issue conversation which makes it possible for us to grapple with the problem better. That may also help them. So here are three things. Something that I had suggested a few years ago and something that a boy had suggested during my debate in Chennai was one, let's have a uniform code for each religion first. Okay, makes a lot of sense. Then you go to the next step, which is that make it optional. Okay, the alternative is pick out issue one by one and find if you can generate consensus around each of those issues, and then digest the bit gradually, which is exactly what Nehru did by breaking it down into 4 installments. This is a seriously sensible approach if your interest is in addressing the issue as opposed to securing a brownie point out of it. Okay? So I'm addressing this to that thinking audience. Whoever wants to listen to this message, it's for them to draw their own lessons. Yes.
Hi, I'm Divya Sridhar, advocate here.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to know regarding this uniformity, what is that uniformity we are talking about? It's succession, for example, Indian Succession Act will be implied for succession, or Hindu Succession Act will be implied, or Sharia, or even Parsi, what it is. Even Sikhs we have, even they have their own act for it.
Correct.
So what it is? And regarding even divorce or marriage, we have there is a different law for different sects.
Correct.
How can you make it uniform? And what is that uniform? We are just discussing uniform, but what we don't even know what is that uniformity we are asking about.
No, this is not working. This won't work. That's okay. Frankly, ma'am, I think you have summarized the entire issue. Ram Jane, I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea. See, which is why I'd like to see, upon receipt of all these comments and representations, what does the Law Commission make of it? What kind of feelers and testers it's going to release? I'd like to see that. Because so far we don't have an expression of position from the government in any way. We only have a statement of vision. We have no clarity on the granularity of it. It's unfortunate. See, the problem when I make the statement is those who are anti-UCC and who have clearly said anti-UCC, they'll use the very same excuse. Oh, where is the document? Where is the document? I'm just saying, anybody interested in taking this conversation forward will have to take a concrete step and present some kind of a template or a dhancha or a mold for us to have a conversation on. Next.
A very good evening to you, sir.
Yes, please.
So my question is, do you think that UCC might be seen as a step toward integrating the larger identity of India, that is Bharat?
I have answered the question. Go to the next question. If it's repetitive, I will not answer.
Ram, sir. Sir, first of all, thank you for being here. Yes, sir. Sir, my question is, can we trace a concrete position of UCC in the larger debate of individual versus the society through both the constitutional lens as well as the contemporary legislation lens, while keeping in mind the political atmosphere present in our country today? And sir, one more small question, that sir, do you think that strictly speaking for our dharma, has pacifism gripped our dharma, or have we been in a very high part tussle with the state? Or
I won't answer the second question on this platform. All I'd suggest is this. If you choose to individualize the individual fully and take him outside the fold of the community, you're destroying the concept of the community. The Constitution itself recognizes the concept of a community and community's rights. Am I audible? No. Am I audible now? Better? Yeah. I'm saying if you choose to make the individual a complete unit in himself or herself or themselves, the problem would be that you're destroying the concept of a community. One, that is anti-evolution, and two, the constitution itself recognizes the existence of a group identity or let's say a communal identity or a collective identity, so to speak. So if you want to approach the UCC entirely from the prism of individual rights, then the community has absolutely no say as far as its cultural norms are concerned. And you're asking the community to basically say, all the rights that you have on cultural aspects, you have outsourced this to the state. And the state will decide what kind of norms you will always follow. That kind of outsourcing which is complete is also not permissible. I will not agree with a position where it says that the individual rights will always prevail over the group rights. Because that argument has its implications on a lot of issues, not just on marriage and maintenance, but on other issues also. Plus, you have taken the position that marriage may be between two individuals, but it happens under the rubric of a community. Therefore, it is an institution of the community, which is why you have a common code as to what constitutes a marriage, saptapati, so on and so forth, right? So you can't say that the community as a group has no rights to speak on the subject. So we'll do something. Ma'am has been waiting for a while. Let the mic start traveling this way. So you ask this question and then let's start coming here.
Yeah. Sir, I'm not a law student, I'm an engineer. So my question is, yeah, my question is, now that we are touching Uniform Civil Code and Hindu Civil Code is already in touch, is there a way that we can trace back and get back whatever we have lost?
Do Hindus really want it all back? How many Hindus want it back? You go and have this conversation outside. The first thing I've been told, and I've encountered this from geniuses sitting on Twitter, do you want untouchability back? Do you want the ability to marry 4 people? Do you want your daughter to have half the rights of your son? Look at the negativity with which Hindus approach their past, and that's very clear from the questions that are being put. They literally have nothing positive to say about their past. I'm having this conversation with such a community. A lot of people who say, why don't we have Hindu schools, why don't we have Hindu curriculum? If such an option were actually to be created, how many parents have the guts, and asked this question before, to send their children to these schools? How many people will do this? Who has stopped your children from being sent to Veda Patashalas? Nobody has stopped you, right? You have not gone. Given a choice between Kalaripayattu and Kung Fu, you're going for Kung Fu. Isn't that clear? So, clearly, the community is asking questions of others which it should be posing to itself. And these are issues which you can't blame anybody on. The time for blaming others is gone. Everybody, at least the thinking members of the community, have access to information through the internet. You should know better. And if you still don't know better, you don't have the right to play victim anymore. So I am done constantly saying, blame the left for history, blame them for history. You've had 9 years, you've had more. What did you do is the only question. Yes, ma'am.
At the outset, Sai, congratulations and thank you so much for not reducing UCC into a liberating women for whatever, wherever doldrums they are suffering in it. I'm so happy that you did not do that, because every other UCC talk finally boils down to women. Have people ever realized that the story is very, very different from a woman's perspective?
Right.
If you look at it, especially when we're looking at the kind of cases that have been coming in, invariably most of the time that the courts are talking about the need for a UCC, it is a woman who is a petitioner there. It is an empowered woman who has understood her rights as per Article 21 of the Constitution, who's going before the court. So if at any point of time someone's going to say it's about liberating women, I would say please allow women to voice and express themselves for who they are.
Right.
Don't make it look like a degraded section being liberated. And at the end of the day, for me, a uniform civil code is only about Article 21 and realization of that to all citizens, irrespective of politics, ideology, or religion. That's one aspect. And that is all UCC is all about. And I think since all of us here are students of law, that's all we need to understand.
Right.
Coming to the other aspect, another narrative which comes whenever we're talking about tribal rights, minority rights, whatever. I would want to give the example of one community, which is the Kodawa community, which hails from the Cook district. Now, this is a very, very advanced community, and in fact, at one point of time, immediately after independence, an offer was given to them saying, we will bring you under the category of ST. They said, no, we are advanced. We are not, we are not downtrodden in any manner, so don't put it on us.
Right.
Right. So, and then, when there was a court judgment talking about equal succession rights for women, the women in the Kodawa community laughed. When they talked about rights of widow, when they talked about remarriage, the women in this community laughed. Because this is something which we have been enjoying since time immemorial.
Right.
But at the same time, when we look at our current situation right now, where we come under the broad category of Hindu, I am not anti-Hindu, pro, whatever, please. I'm just expressing a perspective from being within a community which is now being, everyone wants to look at it as a minority community. So now this is a community which from feeling very, very empowered is being reduced to a status where now members want to ask for the ST status, and the women are actually not being mentioned when it comes to property rights, because everyone wants to come under the broad category of Hindu, because people feel that, this is the only uniformity that comes to, we're going to be accepted. So my point is, from a cultural perspective, if there is a uniform civil code, I would rather look at a uniform civil code which will help me to go back to my roots, where I am a lot more empowered than what the current law is giving me.
Agreed.
This is all. Thank you.
I have no disagreement with this. The rollback in terms of, this is what I said, that the codification of that law has resulted in bringing a lot of people down. And we are going down a further path of greater codification without asking what is the status in each of these things. There's one alternative here, and there's one alternative that people might consider. Why have a national UCC? Perhaps that is a cue which maybe the government is testing. I am spitballing here, I could be completely wrong. I have no special relationship with the government whatsoever. Because at the end of the day, I'm an independent free agent who is free enough to criticize everyone across the board. That's how I would prefer to be. You see, maybe you should start with state UCCs first, have a conversation on that first. Understand the nature of the problem in each place. So, like Uttarakhand is doing, start thinking on those lines. Even there, the problem is UCC has already been presented as an aspirational ideal. I want to tear it down first. Because that is a situation where what you're doing is, you have decided what the goal is and you're trying to force facts to suit that particular goal. Rather, there has to be an empirical collection of data asking, what are the broad communities that we have in a particular region or in a particular state? What is the status of their rights when it comes to marriage, succession, so on and so forth? What would a UCC look like if it is desirable in this context? Let's do one pilot example and then see what happens. Let's take the smallest of states. Start with Goa or any other state for that matter, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe that's one way forward. I completely agree with you. UCC is not going to uplift everyone. It may even bring down a lot of people. Yes, just a second. How many questions do I take? 3 or 4? Yeah, okay. Done. Oh, yes, of course. People on the outside. Please, 100%. I'll come back here. Okay, ठीक है. So,
Har Har Mahadev, Vande Mataram, sir. I am a final year student and a huge fan of you and Dr. Anand. Just give me 30 seconds. So my question is that, is the UCC going to change the provisions in polygamy, exceptionalizing Muslims where they can get away with even 4 marriages in section 494 as protected by the Sharia? As a Jain and as a Sanatani, is it going to protect cows from Gau Hatya? Because that is a very prominent problem going around these days. And as a Bharatiya, this is very important, is UCC going to shield victims of communal terrorism and ban instigative slogans like Gustakhe Rasool ki ek hi saza, and for victims such as Nupur Sharma and Kanhaiya Lal, who was murdered only 5 kilometers from my house in Udaipur? And I love the green shirt, by the way.
UCC is not a silver bullet to address all the problems that we face. On Twitter, I see a lot of conversation where everybody says, UCC leke aao, ye sara matlab theek ho jayega. I don't know what they are talking about, and I don't know who's feeding them this absolute. So there is a better way of saying it. Anyways, the point is, I don't agree with it. So you see what kind of messaging has happened on UCC to the extent that real solutions to real problems don't figure in our list of priorities. It's not going to do anything to problem number 2 or problem number 3 that you've identified. Even as far as number 1 is concerned, I think that's been sufficiently answered through all the questions that have been asked. I'm concerned about Sanatan diversity. I'm interested in protecting the rights. And as far as Gauhatya is concerned, I genuinely hope that it also features in the list of the government's priorities. I doubt that very much, regardless of whichever dispensation it is. Next. Thank you.
I'm an engineer, but my question is for judicial system. Okay, before my question, there is a disclaimer question. Whenever I talk true history of Bharat, many idiots, including the media, claim that as a hate speech and propaganda. How can a free speech could exist without an official history book of India? And then our question is, post bloody partition in 1947, the community which took shelter at the cost of...
Rephrase the question, please.
Okay,
Stick to the subject.
the question is about UCC only.
Yes. Just a second, hold on.
Good evening,
I'll
sir.
come to you.
Good evening, sir. I'm Shreyas.
Yes.
So why are we not focusing on the very first line of the preamble? It says that it's we the people of India. It never says we the people of Hindus, Muslims or Christians. And why is a particular community opposing UCC? Are they not against the child marriage, or are they not willing to give equal rights to the woman? Why do people give statements that UCC is the pro-Hinduism ideology, which is always stated in our law colleges, and even the lecturers do not give right answer to this question? So what your views on this?
All I can say is, particularly in law schools, there appears to be a serious problem in terms of politicizing every conversation. And this appears to be, unfortunately, a post-2014 problem. And when they have realized that certain voices and opinions are finally finding a platform, unfortunately, I don't think they're comfortable with it, while simultaneously singing pains and praise of free speech. I don't wish to answer any of the questions that you've posed, except for saying that it is truly unfortunate that in environs and campuses where the conversation needs to be way more sensible, way more nuanced, and these are the exact places where the conversations are dense, politically driven, ideologically filtered out. That's a sad reflection on the status of education in this particular sector across the country. And it's terrible because what we are producing, in which case, are opinionated activists who masquerade as lawyers, who don't know how to present facts first and deal with facts first. Their opinions come first. Now this row, we'll take this row.
Hello. Sir, I have a question that is, when I read Manu Samhita, the codification which has happened in Manu Samhita is so clear. There are 17 laws which apply to every individual.
Right.
And it can be so easily solved if the whole community accepts. And we have seen the Cholas ruling for 1600 years with that laws.
Right.
And great empires have ruled. When we are codifying a law, we are trying to solve a problem, but it's creating more and more problem. Why not take something which is already there in place and then go right from there? Like you see US, Christianity is the major religion. Even though the laws of the minority community is there, the interest of minorities are not lost. Why can't we take a step back where, including the Britishers, when they enacted the IPC also, you see the 494 section, it also comes from Manu Samhita directly, right? So the same thing can't
answer
be
the
taken.
question. And this question and the answer to it could land me in a lot of controversy. Nevertheless, it's already started. I think people should undertake a simple exercise, and I've suggested this once in 2019 in my first lecture based on the Padmanabha Swami temple experience of the litigation experience. So people said, why are we so attached to the Manusmriti, those who are followers of the Vedic tradition, what is it, so on and so forth. I'll give your answer in two parts. I said, do the simplest of exercises. We have students of comparative religion. Okay. Do only two things. You have been focusing on the Manusmriti all these days. Great. Keep the Manusmriti on one side. Keep the Old Testament next to it. Keep the New Testament next to it. Keep the Quran next to it. And the Talmud and the Torah. Why don't we undertake a comparative exercise to ask which document protects women, which document furthers social justice? I am not giving any answer. I am saying this country has had a tradition, thanks to a few people, of burning the Manusmriti. Okay? Ask anyone who subscribes to the Vedic tradition, what is the significance of that? They have zero idea as to what this document is about. They have no idea whatsoever as to... No, it's surprising, as you said, several of our empires have treated this as the go-to document. Now, it's surprising that all these travelers have come to Bharat, and none of these travelers have said that they have seen a problem here in terms of people being kept out somewhere or people being discriminated somewhere. They don't understand what is the phase that all of this problem actually started. They don't want to discuss that at all. So the conversation is, I will take up one phase of history and extrapolate it reverse for 7,000 years to say this was always the situation. You want to present Hindu diversity as an argument on one point and Hindu tendency to constantly change on the one hand. And on the other hand, you're saying that this has always been immutable for 7,000 years. I mean, the stupidity of this is astounding. The inconsistency in this logic is unbelievable. See, here's the point. Am I then making the argument that everything that is said there is valid today? I will not answer the question one way or the other because I'm going to say, I don't know. The humility of saying, I don't know, is lost. First, grow that humility where you say, I don't know, instead of shooting your mouth on everything under the sun. Two, take up this comparative exercise and let's have a public debate, chapter and verse, on every provision of the Manusmriti and every comparable provision from every other document. Let's do it. Let's do it. Because anyway, this document is in the dock. It has suffered everything that it was never meant to. Done, ho gaya. You have blamed it, you have defamed it, till the cows come home, it's done. Now let's talk about everybody else. Why hasn't the comparative exercise started yet? Nobody has done that yet. See, we need trained bridge scholars who can actually do this. And this is one of the things that we need to focus on. I'll just finish my point, hold on. In the so-called jurisdictions that we look up to for framing of laws and on history of framers of laws, Manu is celebrated as one of the foremost framers of the law, as someone who's contributed to the repository of legal jurisprudence across the world. So along with Hammurabi and others, he is mentioned. Hammurabi's laws even go to the extent of eye for an eye. That is given a place of pride in the discussion on comparative jurisprudence and on evolution of legal thought. But this gentleman, and it's not a gentleman, what did I say? It's a position. Different people have occupied that particular position. That position has not found even the remotest of acceptance. So I don't wish to sit and convince anybody else about just read it. I'm not saying accept it. I'm not saying endorse it. I'm not saying legalize or formalize or legislate it. I'm saying read it, entirety, from cover to cover, and then you tell me what have you made of it. If according to you, this particular book has the worst of positions for the female gender, why don't you read it in its entirety and let's see what all it says. I have no problems with the discussion because fortunately, as Hindus, we have become thick-skinned when it comes to anybody talking anything they want to understand about our religion. It's okay, go on, talk about it. Allow us to subject every other book to the very same degree of scrutiny in the tone you have done it. I'm okay with somebody going through a document academically, applying scholarly principles and saying this is it, this is it, this is it, I will accept it. ठीक है, good here, bad here, ugly here. I will accept it because I am not exactly bound by it because our Shastric position is very different. However, extend the very same courtesy to your own documents. And I would like to see which organization, which platform in this country has the guts to actually undertake that debate publicly? Nobody has it.
Namaskara.
Yes.
Am I audible?
I'll come back. 100% I'll come back to you. I'll finish that and come back to you.
Am I audible? Okay.
Yes, please.
Namaskara, Sai, from one Indian in the south to another Indian from the south.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, I understand the skepticism that religious communities have and tribal communities have with respect to UCC, but why is the liberal left, which in principle generally likes equality of all sorts, opposing the idea of UCC in India? Is it only because perceived Hindu majority government is presenting it, or is there an underlying idea behind it? Also, will the UCC look at men's rights? I've been listening to a lot of women's rights being added in.
Right.
What about men's rights? Will that include prenuptial agreements? That could happen. Yeah. Thank you. Jai Hind.
So I think there is a gradual conversation that's coming towards gender-neutral laws, even with respect to a lot of discriminatory provisions. I think the good part is even the Supreme Court has warmed up to the conversation in light of the extensive abusive use of 498A in quite a few cases. There are judgments to this particular effect. Now the second point is, you're trying to look for consistency, logic, sanity and maturity in the left. Far more intelligent people have given up. Give up. Give it up. This conversation is not happening in good faith with them at all. I've tried engaging. Everything starts with a brand and a label before you even make your point. So instead of actually making your point, the first thing that you're actually left doing is to defend yourself before defending the point. When someone engages in that, or let's say indulges in that kind of strategy, clearly he has no interest in engaging with you in good faith. He doesn't even want to debate with you. Forget engagement. Debate with me properly. They won't do that. I had a recent debate on same-sex marriage. I think you should go take a look at it. I don't have a problem with fighting two people at all. Bring anybody on, I don't give a damn about it. But the point is this. Here's the point. People can say, well, what did you do to some gentleman when you were on a platform and you were the moderator? I'll give an answer. I did not interrupt the person when he was giving his answer. I waited for him to fall on his own answer. I waited for that person to speak so much that the inconsistency in his position comes out. That's what you should do. I did not interrupt. If you look at my body language and what I was saying, yes sir, so, that's what I did. In stark contrast, even if two people are arrayed against one, I don't have a problem. Because as lawyers, can you say that if there is only one lawyer from this side, there can't be two senior counsels on the other side? No. We are used to this on a daily basis. It doesn't make a difference to my life. I'm confident of my position regardless of who's on the other side. If I don't know, I'll admit I don't know. But I know, then I will not stop. So the point is, that is the nature of the engagement. Just look at the opening lines of the debate, and here's what is seriously problematic. The moderator compares herself to Ubhay Bharati, compares the other side to Shankaracharya, and me to Mandana Mishra. Harakiri. None of us is worth being compared to Adi Shankara. Seriously. We are not even equal to a 16th portion of a speck of dust on his foot. You should not have. I'm ashamed I let that comparison pass by me. I should have stood up and said, not done. Second, Mandana Mishra was ruled against by the referee who was his wife. And the wife chose a neutral position. Here the moderator was wedded to the position of the other side. Factually inaccurate comparison. So you will call yourself this and that. Now you will call Shankara all these. Well, Shankara was a scriptural casteist. That's the language you've used. That's the language you've used against one of the greatest spiritual icons this country has ever produced. So, engage with them with the knowledge that you're dealing with a snake of the first order. Yes.
Good evening, sir.
This gentleman, then we'll come back.
Good evening, sir.
Just 2 more questions and we'll wrap it up. Somebody will have to translate what he says, okay? Come to the question as opposed to making it a speech, please. Yeah.
ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ವರದಿಗಳು ಸಹ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ವರದಿಗಳು ಸಹ ಸಮಾನ ನಾಗರಿಕ ಸಂಹಿತೆ ಭಾರತದ ಸದ್ಯದ ಒಂದು ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾರಿ ತರೋದು ಬೇಡ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಒಂದು ಸರ್ಕಾರದ ನಿಲುವನ್ನು ತಿಳಿಪಡಿಸಿಲ್ಲ ಸರ್ಕಾರದ ಒಂದು ನಿಲುವನ್ನು ತಿಳಿಪಡಿಸಿದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಯಾವ ಒಂದು ಆಧಾರದ ಮೇಲೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅವರ ಸಿದ್ಧಾಂತವೇನು ನನಗೆ ಅನಿಸ್ತದೆ ಈ ಒಂದು ಸಮಾನ ನಾಗರಿಕ ಸಂಹಿತೆ ಒಂದು ಹಿಂದೂ ಸಿದ್ಧಾಂತದ ಮೇಲೆ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ತದೆ ಜಾತ್ಯತೀತನ ನಿರ್ಮೂಲನೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಬುಡಕಟ್ಟು ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಒಂದು ಅವರ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಮೂಲಭೂತ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳಿಗೆ ಧಕ್ಕೆ ತರುವಂತ ಒಂದು ನಾಗರಿಕ ಸಂಹಿತೆಯನ್ನು ಜಾರಿ ತರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಹೊರಟಿದೆ.
Can you answer what?
The question is, except collecting so-called data, allowing some sort of rumors everywhere, the government is not coming out with a white paper to answer what exactly is being done. Therefore, in the guise of UCC, he apprehends that a systematic attack is being done on scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and other people and oppressed community as such. Therefore, the government must take a clear stand and come out with some sort of a white paper to clear all these things. Otherwise, these rumors will go on and the allegations will continue.
I don't disagree with you at all. Because you see, what happens is, when you drop a few points here and there, and you're not ready for a clear, detailed discussion, apprehensions arise in everybody's mind. Allow me to say this. I don't think this government will do anything which is against the interests of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. And I'm saying this not as a stooge or the spokesperson for the government, only for one reason. Despite the Supreme Court pointing out serious instances of abuse of the SC/ST Atrocities Act and coming out with safeguards, this government legislated out Supreme Court safeguards. That is the extent to which this government has gone. I agree with what the Supreme Court did, and I disagree with what the government did. Therefore, I don't think this government has remotely the guts to do anything which is anti-SC, anti-ST. Okay? But I agree with you that the absence of a document allows everybody to say everything. And therefore, a document must come out. I don't disagree with you on that. Yes.
Sir.
Just a second. How many more questions?
Sir, my question.
Just a second. Just a second. Hold on. So, how many more questions? 2 more questions? Yeah, please. Come to you, I'll come to you. Don't worry. The mic, because you see, this is being recorded. And if I'm being embarrassed, I might as well be embarrassed on camera. So, let it go. I don't want to run away from that. Who? Okay. Yes, please.
Sir, we have a working civil code, common uniform code in the form of criminal law, that's CRPC, since 1.5 century. What is the necessity of having so many useless voice regarding the common civil code? First question. Second question is the Hindu law overly codified, or is there anything left over in Hindu law to codify still? Because we have the Ahmads of Bengal were raising about the concerns on Hindus losing their rights when UCC is affected.
I think there is a lot more to be left in terms of codification of Hindu law, and I disagree that codification is good. I'm saying the point very clearly that it could lead to a lot more problems because codification freezes a particular position in time as opposed to allowing it to grow. That's the nature of custom, as I explained. A criminal code, it has to be common by definition because the state has the power to wield the power of dispensing criminal justice system. That Dandaniti has to be common. So the comparison between a uniform criminal code and a uniform civil code is fundamentally problematic. Okay? The power of dispensing punishment to a particular offense and the monopoly of committing that legally sanctified violence has to be only with the state. And therefore this comparison does not work. The need for a uniform civil code is a different question, but the existence of diversity in civil laws is actually natural It would be unnatural for it to not be diverse. And the need for a uniform criminal code is natural and imperative. It is a state necessity. That's not the same thing with a uniform civil code. Otherwise, when we were drafting the IPC or taking it forward, why were the framers of the Constitution very clear that civil laws and the uniformity of civil laws can be discussed at a later point, but criminal code, it can't be separate. Even when it comes to criminal code, the state certainly has the power to make amendments. Every state government has the power to make amendments. So the assumption that uniformity is even in criminal code is not entirely true. The very same provisions exist, but the amendments to those provisions also exist, which are state-based. So this is one answer. I'll take how many questions? Two more. Yes, please. Yes, please. What do I do?
On a lighter note, last time we had 370 discussion and the government announced it. Just as we are speaking, the government has announced a special parliamentary session on 18th. I just hope it's a coincidence.
At least I have received no memo. Go on.
Just because legislature lacks will and judiciary is unwilling to reform a particular community, why should I, as a Hindu, and I speak just for myself, as a community that has been exclusively subjected to a lot of reform already, be further subject to reform just because you don't have the guts to take on an approach?
Right.
And in this aspect, a lot of intellectual right, especially public intellectuals on the right, have batted for UCC previously. And we definitely have some collateral damage if we agree, let's say, as Hindus to UCC. And why isn't, let's say, the right speaking up enough of this? And the second thing I wanted to ask was, you spoke about the difference between Achara and Shastra. But wouldn't be Shastra and Dharma a better comparison?
No.
Because Achara is subject to social compulsions, while Dharma...
Dharma recognizes both the validity of Shastra and Achara. Your comparison is slightly problematic, but it's incorrect, not problematic. Now here's the question. How many Hindus wrote to the Law Commission, even after the extension of the deadline, expressing their problem with interference with their laws and customs? The Muslim Personal Law Board has written, their representation has come out in public. This was not limited to any particular set of elitists or intellectuals. Everybody could have written. All those people who have a problem with interference with Hindu position, so to speak, how many of us bothered to ensure that we put something in writing and our position is captured for posterity? How many of us have done it? I don't think so. Have you done it? Why? Because we have only been shouting on social media. The government has given you an opportunity to participate in the process, express your position, and it's not barred. The timeline has been extended also. Why haven't you written? Other communities write. Other communities use every possible way of advocacy. You don't do it. How many communities here or how many people got together and said, let's put together a document using the services of a lawyer. This can go as a representation of my sampradaya or my community. How many people have done this? How many mathas and adhinams across the country have written to the government? You choose to remain silent, that means you're happy to be rolled over. Then don't cry about it later. This is not, it's a democratic process and the government has opened that particular process. You have not taken advantage of it, so your silence will be treated as acceptance, period. Next.
Hi, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a lay person, I'm a school teacher.
Okay.
I teach English and social science. I have two questions for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you remove the word secular being a constitutional advocate in the Supreme Court? First one. Second one, the woke agenda is, it looks like it's a very simple thing, but
it's not. In your field, it's worse.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry, but it might make some people uncomfortable, but I would like to ask you, what could be the extent of the impact if it gets legalized here? Would we be asked to ideologize the children with all the...
Hasn't it already started? Some of the school curricula and the material that's being introduced under the rubric of the NEP, unfortunately,
yes,
the consultants who have been brought on board to advise the government on this are rank woke propagandists.
So my question is, we as common people here, we know we cannot buy an ox for milk or a cock for a egg, no? So family happens to be the most sacred and the most powerful unit for any country to become country. It is family first.
Correct.
If we break this, what can we do as a people to not allow the constitution or someone sitting up there to pass this bill or
Here's
make it.
the important part. UCC will generate this crowd. Speak of this problem and what is happening in the education system. I would like to see how many people turn up to actually attend this conversation. Because UCC is a hot topic. UCC is sensationalist. So it gets attention. On the education front, the serious problems of absolute pernicious infiltration of the woke agenda is it's not even getting the traction it is supposed to get, not even 10% of it. Thankfully, I'm happy that you've actually brought it up. See, there are quite a few other priorities for us as a community or as a people, whether it's the Waqf Act or let's say the woke agenda and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, what happens is when a particular issue gains traction and people keep pushing it as the issue to be discussed, then the public runs towards that issue with a herd mentality as opposed to looking at, okay, what are we missing? Isn't there something more important to look at? What do I say? There is only so much we can do. And in terms of removal of secularism from the constitution, I've already been accused of something through love letters that were written today. So I'd say I leave it to the hands of the Almighty, the gods in plural.